Hello everyone! How are you doing? I hope you're well, I hope you're enjoying yourselves. And I hope XSplit will stop flashing latest news or whatever at me. Go away, XSplit, stop being annoying. Stop being annoying. Yes, la da 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 da. I do not need to know latest news. I don't want to know the latest news. Hello everyone! I hope that's better. So, I have been reconfiguring the office again, because I'm just spent today taking data apart and taking stuff out of that I wanted. And soon I'm going to be rebuilding something around this. So, basically I had to reconfigure the entire office, so I had space to do this. And clean space, and everything was positioned where it wanted to be. And when that moved over there to be taken apart, things had to move from over there, which meant I reconfigured this. So, hello everyone. As you can guess, today we are doing science fiction ones. And the reason I'm doing concentrating on Glyn's is because, for starters, he's got a new book out. So I wanted to talk about that because, if in doubt, I am going to give, as I've said before, my rule on friends' books is if they're very good, I will talk about them. If they're not good, I just don't talk about them. Which is kind of unfair, because if they're not friends and they're not good books, I will quite happily say they're not good books. But basically, it's a bias, but it also stops me having to deal with friends getting very upset with me. You can just infer for it from that the fact they are not my that I don't talk about it. Stream is choppy. I have no idea why it is choppy. It's not supposed to. We are doing this at 30 frames per second. 30. So it should be okay. It's saying it's got excellent connection. And it's saying it's all okay, so it shouldn't be choppy. Right. Hello, Paul Amos. Hello, Christopher Ryan. Hello, Calvin Gasberg. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello, Tana Velica. Ooh, that's nice, Tana Velica. Sounds like you've got a good evening. Coke, kebab, 2 orange cats, and good to go. Michael Cooch, John Shea. Happy birthday, John. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello, Albazaski. Hello, Mikey Newman. Hello, Glyn Stewart. Glad you're here. Hello, DG40. Hello, RG. Hello, George Newman. Hello, Seneca Nero. Christopher Ryan. Hello. Hi, Stephen Richards. Hello, Jos Vonuk. Matthias Slavic. The camera still has a vibration issue. That's annoying, because the camera is now on top of the screen. Basically, I have a screen here. This is the big screen. So the camera is sitting on top of the screen, so it shouldn't be vibrating. But the thing is, that it's not the new computer yet, because it hasn't been built yet, because not all the components have arrived, i.e. the graphics card hasn't cleared customs, and a couple of other bits haven't got here, the operating system as well. So, I will try not to place this down with a thump. Yes, I am drinking both milk and iron brew. Life is interesting. Anyway. So, to explain what we're doing today, and apparently I've got high CPU usage warning, so ouch, and hopefully it's okay. I will do... what shall I do? Twitter. No, because that will distract me. What should I put up? Plain blank screen should do. It's a very fancy book cover. Hello, Mandy. And Matthias Slavic. I'm not sure I said hello. And, yeah. the camera has ADHD, too much amber. It shouldn't be moving to moving at the moment. It doesn't seem to be rocking. When I look at it, it is not rocking. Hmm. What can I do about this one? Hmm. Hmm. I do not understand the concept of too much amber. Too much amber is foreign to me. It's something which just doesn't exist. Now, before we get into this book and I start into it, remember that what I'm going to be doing in these sci-fi discussions is I'm going to go through their battles in these books and talk about what lessons they can learn, how interesting, how much they do reveal about the future, but also what lessons they have for current officers and where they apply to history. Which I found interesting last time because I did it once as sort of just a random thing because I thought it might be interesting, and basically everyone liked it a lot. And so, woohoo! I thought I'll do that again at some point. And the thing is about Remenant Faction, I have to start off by giving a bit of a codicil about it because there is this. I have never. Okay, let's start with this. They're going to have to wait, what, a week before they even start decontamination? About that, he agreed, not looking back at the Admiral as Hamilton spoke without announcing himself. Welcome to Aderon, sir. I'm afraid I'm under strict orders not to stand or salute. I have never required Mickey Mouse bull in my, and especially not of my wounded soldiers, Sonia Hamilton told him. Stepping up next to him and dropping into an easy parade rest. I wish we'd been faster, Henry. I'm not sure if it was physically possible, but I wish we'd been faster. I'm not sure even where you found the ships. Procyon Reserve, she replied with a soft chuckle. Rear Admiral Clarke was in Procyon, in charge of reviewing the older ships there to see what was worth putting into reserve and what needed to be scrapped. None of the ships had more than caretaker crews, but they hadn't been stripped for parts or otherwise decommissioned, so he saw Hamilton shrug out of the corner of his eye. Rear Admiral Alexander Clarke wasn't a man Henry was overly familiar with, but he was aware of the log div officer in passing. Apparently he owed the man a drink. Iron brews preferred. Clarke got the reports that we'd sent an allied flotilla with a carrier at its heart to rush over, and they hadn't reported in. So he took his assessments, short-stopped the entire decommissioning process, and ordered his log div people to restock the capital ships he thought were in the best shape. But since he didn't have crews for 3 Lexingtons and 4 Jaguars, thanks to the stand-downs, he put out a call to the reserve and veterans network for volunteers. So the destroyers are all initiative, Henry asked, but those 6 capital ships are thrown together crews of volunteers? And flying dragoons, not lancers, off Lexington, Charles de Gaulle, and Kiev, Hamilton confirmed. But we figured nobody was going to complain about an extra 300 gravity shield fighters, even if they are the last generation. We wouldn't have known. Officially, I have no idea how they caught up to us, the Admiral noted dryly. We left Zeon before they left Procyon, but they caught up to us 5 days ago. About as the battle's being fought, Henry murmured. They were spending 15 hours a day in the acceleration tanks, Wong. There's no way they caught up doing anything else. He grimaced. And you still would only have been in time to avenge us if we mucked up. If you hadn't made the Osiris run, Hamilton replied flatly, the capital's clear. We sent drones ahead, but they had to go through systems we knew were safe. They'll get here tomorrow, I suspect. So, yeah, slight bias where this particular book is concerned, but I was still very pleased with it. Although apparently I didn't get a speak. My namesake didn't get a speaking part, which I find cruel. It's not low lighting; it's the normal lighting, actually. Let's see. Give me a second. Hello. Right. Is that better? Although, now I need to shift sides of this. I'd say part of the reason for the shift around was also so that the camera could watch me building the computer. So I can hear it. Clint, whenever the talk is talking about sci-fi, just assume he's talking about your books. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's the whole desk that's moving. I hope it's not the whole desk that's moving. Is that better? Because if it is the whole, that I am trying to get a stabilized camera, but actually getting a decent one from Amazon does seem to be interesting. Hello, Amelia Burrow. Sender, better. Hello, I'm glad it's better. Does your desk share a wall with fans, heaters? No, it's freestanding from the wall and it's on the concrete floor, so it should be okay. But whenever I put anything on that screen, it seems to start picking up shakes, and I have no idea from where because the screen, according to me, is completely and utterly stable. Still shakes a tad. Mm. It's now on the same spot it's normally on. So, well, life is sent to give us fun. I am trying to get a stabilized camera, as said before. You're looking less haggard, feeling better. Yes, I'm feeling a little bit better. I had fun yesterday. I hope it. No, it doesn't. This one doesn't have autofocus. But no. Anyway, I did leave the first few minutes clear. If you look at if you go to the bottom, you will see there's a sort of on the description. I've left sort of some timing for introduction before we get into this book. And I am reading from my phone because I have all these books as Kindle rather than hard copy. Something. Do you know when pallets and forklifts came into military logistics or logistics in general? Pallets came in quite quickly. There are some versions of palletization going around as early as World War One, although it's not palletization as we would understand it properly. Palletization in terms of forklifts and palletization can start to really come in the 50s and 60s. So, why is this book particularly good? Because this book is good because the battles in it show that sometimes the choice is between your least worst option. There's a common phrase which goes around US military doctrine and NATO doctrine as a whole. You don't present your opponents with problems, you present them with dilemmas. Problems have solutions. Dilemmas are something that there is no good choice in. It's just working out which is the least worst option for you to go. Well, the reality is war is more often dilemmas than problems, even without each side actively trying to do that. If you're actively trying to gauge a scenario where you're going to present your enemy with dilemmas rather than problems, that's going to give you more fun. It's certainly going to give you more time and more to think about. But war itself, as a rule, is usually more of a case of dilemmas than problems. It's very rare you're in a scenario where there's a problem and here's the straight, easy solution. Woohoo! In fact, if you are in war presented with a problem that has a straightforward solution, the odds are you are either dealing with some very idiotic bureaucracy from home or someone is trying to set a trap. Because easy solutions tend to lead to traps. The reality is, war is not nice. But there is a problem when you read biographies and when you read some of the versions of history that come out. Because let's put it this way, and this is something I notice, especially with people who are not from a military background or a military history, naval history sort of background. When they start writing histories of conflicts, they tend to, rather than view the military systems situations as dilemmas, they view them as problems with solutions, and they present therefore military history as one of and military command as one thing of one long list of problem solving. It's not. It's rarely is. It very rarely is one long list of problem solving. You will have a choice of go left, go right. That presents that problems. That presents that problems. I once had someone. This was in a strategic discussion table work, and they came up with a movement plan. And it was a beautiful movement plan. Everything was in lovely lines. Everything was beautifully organized. They picked out the best roads, the biggest roads, the flattest roads, and they would move on the target incredibly quickly. And I looked at it and I said, it's great. And I asked them, I said, so your view is that you've looked at analysis of that? Yes, and the enemy has only lightly defended it. Yeah, they have. Have you checked where their maneuver forces are? Yes, they're off to a position which was to the west of it and to the east of it. But it's very difficult for them to maneuver. Is it? Yes, it'll take days for them to come in, whereas I can get through this whole route in 2 days. It'll take them a day to come from either side to even engage me. Okay. So you don't think there's going to be mines or anything on that route? No. Now here's the thing. It was a tabletop game coming up, and I thought, can I give this student any more hints, or shall I just let them play? I let them play. They learnt a very simple lesson that day. That bridges can be collapsed, mines can be laid quite quickly, and something which is supposed to be a 2-day route entirely can turn into a 6-day slog. You're only halfway there, and oh sugar, all the maneuver forces are coming at you from flanks, positions you can't easily cover, and they're hitting you just behind where your main force is. So your force has to turn around and start attacking backwards in order to secure its roof of its supply lines. And oh yes, then the forces which were supposed to be defending the capital that you were structured around started coming straight towards you. Oh, you've lost your entire army. The dilemma there had been quite an obvious one. There were two very hard routes, and there was a apparently very easy route. But that a very easy route allowed the two hard routes to concentrate on it. It looked like an easy problem to solve. It wasn't. And that's the good thing about it. Donald Cameron, Doc, I was watching a film, old Filio said the first lieutenant was called Jimmy. I was wondering where that came from. That's been around a long, long time. In submarines, it's quite traditional. There are about a dozen different stories about where that came from. I am nowhere near knowledgeable enough to be able to decide which one is the truth. I have friends who are ardently devoted to this subject and have learned it very well, who none of them can agree over which of the story is the true one, where it came from. Right. Covers also, war is most democratic. The enemy has a vote too, yes. Hmm. Yeah. Evening, Doctor. Don't worry, Paul. So, this is what we're going to start off with, Remenant Faction. And this is what I'm going to start. I'm going to read you actually most of the chapter. Okay? So, please note that's going to be played. This is from this. It's chapter 3. After almost 2 years of working together, being together as romantic partners for over 6 months, and walking into hell together repeatedly, Sylvia and Henry Wong had a solid sense of the limits of each other's sphere and strong professional partnership. Sylvia knew exactly which members of Paladin's crew she could impose on to help her and which ones were too busy operating the ship in a combat environment. Lieutenant Commander Naval Jackson, for example, was the destroyer's communications officer. Right now, she was managing connections with the sensor drones that the UPSF ship had sent into the teeth of the Khemri formation. Commander Chan Rong, on the other hand, was Henry's communications officer. Their main role was to maintain links between Paladin and the other ships under the Commodore's command. With no subordinate or allied ships in the system, Commander Chan wasn't unoccupied, but they had availability to help the ambassador. While pinging the capital city and the orbital platforms to establish a link, they informed Sylvia, "We're still a full light minute out, so time lag is going to be an issue." "I'm used to it, Commander," Sylvia told them. The screen in her office had full access to the tactical reports and sensors set up for the Commodore, but she wasn't as fully trained and able to read them as the destroyer's military crew. She definitely could read the distance to the Rashov, though. And she understood enough about the vector diagrams to know that Paladin was beginning a long curve that would take her right back to the skip line she'd all arrived through. United Planets Alliance liked to pretend they didn't abandon their friends and allies, but Sylvia Torovich had been one of their representatives working inside the Khemri Empire. She'd armed and encouraged multiple revolutions that she'd known the rest of the version wouldn't be able to support as quickly as New Rebels were hoping. At best, as she could, she never lied to any of the assorted alien races she convinced to rise up against the Khemri, but she definitely let them draw their own conclusions. This wasn't the first time she'd fled a star system aboard a UPSF destroyer, leaving the theoretical allies behind her to the mercy of the Khemri. But that was the job sometimes, and she raised a sharply groomed eyebrow that linked to Chan as the timer ticked down. "Any response, Commander?" "Not yet. Wait!" The heavy-set Chinese officer held up a finger as they listened to something on their internal network. "I have a link. Someone is sending an active channel under Verscheron encryption protocols. I'm isolating it for security and can link you in." They paused, finishing a task Sylvia couldn't even see. "On your order. Connect me." Sylvia didn't even need to check what her surroundings looked like. Paladin had more space than most destroyers. She needed less fuel for the same range, as Sylvia understood it, which had allowed them to squeeze in a small presence mission section to provide some working space for a diplomatic detachment. That meant she had a permanent office, with the flag of the UPA, a blue banner with a curved V of 8 gold stars to her right, and the flag of the UPSF, the same V on a stylized rocket, to her left. The Paladin's silver helmet commissioning seal was positioned directly behind her. She'd had to improvise an impressive office enough times in her career to appreciate having a space aboard Paladin. She might be hundreds of light years and weeks of travel from Seoul and the UPA Security Council, but here now Sylvia Torovich spoke for the United Planets Alliance. The screen in front of her shifted as Chan linked the channels onto her systems, the plot of the system vanishing to be replaced by the command center of a Khemri prefabricated defense platform. There were at least 24 people working in the background, but the video feed was centered on a Tac woman. The stranger wore an unfamiliar black uniform that faded oddly into Tac's grey skin and head tentacles, but she was definitely in command. She was also, at the moment the channel was established, looking aside at something else. There would be a 2-minute round trip for every message back and forth between Sylvia and the stranger, so Sylvia leaned into her own pickup and spoke rather than waiting. Thanks to the scale of the Khemri Empire and its shadow across the Verschon and the successor states taking shape, she didn't need to worry about language. She spoke the Khemri trade language, Chem, fluently, and could reasonably expect that any senior civil or military officer of Rashova did the same. "Rashova, their representative. I am Ambassador Sylvia Torovich of the United Planets Alliance. I was on my way to warn you about a rogue faction of Khemri warriors threatening the Ra sector, but it appears that we are far too late. Unfortunately, I do not believe my ship will have the capacity to turn the tide of this battle. We are prepared to establish contact protocols with whatever emergency continuance plans you have and arrangements for further aid going forward, but," she spread her hands helplessly and leaned back to wait. Tac were one of the Ashal species, the seeded races. Other than having a small waving tendrils instead of hair and skin tones that were odd to the human eyes, they could easily be mistaken for human. No one was entirely sure why some 70% of the races in the Khemri Empire and the surrounding space could pass for each other at a distance. First War and now the chaos of the Empire's fall had been far more important since humanity had discovered that oddity of the universe. She could see the moment where about 2 minutes after she connected, when the Rashovan officer saw the channel link up. The stranger waited through Sylvia's introduction and then levelled a grim gaze on the camera. Ambassador, I am a Guild Admiral Chat, the woman said softly. Until a few minutes ago, I was second in command of Rashova's defences, but my commander died aboard our dreadnoughts. Responsibility for the safety of Rashova's system is now mine, but the Khemeri have not yet transmitted any demands of terms for our surrender. I have no choice but to accept whatever terms they impose, which also leaves me no choice but to urge you to flee the Rashowa system as quickly as you can. I cannot and can neither guarantee the safety of your vessel, Ambassador, nor guarantee that I will not be required to use Rashovan security forces to hunt you down. Guild Admiral, one of the officers on the channel shouted. The enemy are splitting their force. Sylvia brought the tactical feed up in her internal network, giving mental orders to her implants to overlay the feed above her display. She saw what the officer above Rashova was seeing in a few seconds of examination. The Khemeri fleet has split into 3 clear detachments. One, led by a solid phalanx of at least 12 super dreadnoughts, was continuing their approach to Rashova. Another, mostly consisting of escorts and gunships, was clearly manoeuvring after surviving Rashovan ships. The last, anchored by 2 more super dreadnoughts and demonstrating the increasing acceleration of the Khemeri's new ships, was now very definitely heading to intercept Paladin. Sylvia wasn't sure of the exact balance of power. UPA ships had a near monopoly on the gravity shields they used for protection and could fight well above their weight, but she knew that the destroyer couldn't fight 2 super dreadnoughts. That would be amazing. Even if Henry had already done it once. Ambassador, you must leave, Chat told Sylvia. I and many of my people were Vesharan once, and we owe you the warning for that. For now, I will do what I must to save my people. The channel cut off, and Sylvia swallowed a curse. The mission in the Rashowa system was now a clear failure, which left them with problems. A mental command reopened the channel to the flag deck as her tactical feed reappeared on the main display. Henry, the locals are surrendering as soon as the Khemeri let them. She told them crisply. Slavery for death, I suppose. They're making assumptions I wouldn't in their place. That pursuit wing heading after their escorts isn't calling for surrenders. And the ship's coming for us? Henry's image in her mental feed shrugged. We're already running, he admitted. Inerka is adjusting course to cut it even more sharply, and we're increasing acceleration to maximum. We'll be clear in time. They're going to follow us, Inerka warned. That could get messy. I'm counting on it, Henry told them both. The E2 want to test their fighters against dreadnoughts in a more controlled environment. They don't want to have the first strike by their shielded starfighters against dreadnoughts to be in a full fleet action. Paladin had brought friends with her, at least as far as R78. Among those friends were the interior carrier Fronds of Will. Sylvia wasn't sure how to match the new E2 carriers and their fighters against Khemeri ships, but she did know that a UPSF carrier wouldn't blink at sending their strike group against 2 regular dreadnoughts. And there are Rashovans, she asked? Henry shook his head. I hate it, but surrendering is the right call for them. We can pull together our allies and make contact with the other 2 ex-Khemeri colonies before the warriors reach Andron. We'll be back, Sylvia, and they know it. Andron and Kori were the other 2 systems in the Ra sector that had served as homes to the Khemeri themselves. All 3 had at last seen UPSF ships during Golden Lancelot, the genocidal operation that had ended the war by wiping out the Khemeri's Khemrad reproductive caste. Without the Khemrad, no new Khemeri could be born. It was possible that the Khemeri artisans could find a technological solution before old age claimed them all, but Khemeri society was built on the labor, physical and intellectual, of non-Khemeri slaves and Khemeri drones. This was why the Khemeri had abandoned the outer provinces of their empire, leaving 6,000 stars to their own devices while the empire focused on the 8 provinces and a mere 4,000 stars. We will be back, Sylvia repeated. We broke the Khemeri once, we can do it again. The part that worries me, though, the screen in front of her marked the rapidly dispersing Khemeri task forces, but it didn't magically produce the answer she was looking for. They haven't communicated with the Rashovans at all, she told Henry and the Irenica. They're trying to surrender, but the only people answering their hails in the system are us. Weapons fire is a form of communication, Irenica said dryly. They've definitely exchanged that. Khemeri warriors are pompous jackasses who know most of their opponents understand Chem, the Commodore said slowly. Henry Wong had served through the entirety of the 17-year war against the Khemeri Empire. His take on that then meant more to Sylvia than most people's, and not just because he was Henry Wong. They will taunt, belittle, and condescend until they are actually losing, Henry continued. Something's wrong. These warriors, they're angry. Angry like the Khemeri never were before Golden Lancelot. And that means I'm not sure I know what they're going to do. The channel was silent for several seconds, and then she heard Inerka swear softly as a tactical feed updated new icons. Whatever formal report was on the bridge wasn't related to Sylvia. Her link with Inerka and Henry was almost entirely mental. A link between their internal networks, but she was getting the tactical feed. Why are they launching? Sylvie asked. They can't hit us this range, can they? She knew the range for the missiles wasn't always the standard 750,000 kilometers that the missiles could achieve from rest, but the Chimeri fleet was still over 25 light seconds from the planet, over 10 times their range. Range on a missile is an arbitrary thing, Henry explained, his voice generally strangely distant and clinical. We generally calculate it based on how far the missile can travel under power, since even orbital defense platforms engage in some level of evasive maneuvering. But the missile keeps going after that, forever really. We have to include fail-safes on our missiles to keep them from continuing on for all eternity. Sylvia had been vaguely aware of that, mostly in the context of the need to make sure those fail-safes had no external access once fired, but she wasn't sure of the point. If the orbital planets could still evade, what are they shooting at if they can't hit the orbital platforms? The planet. Suddenly she understood why Henry had gone so clinical. Like a vast majority of officers in Golden Lancelot, he hadn't been told that his strike on the Kenmarad Creche was part of an empire-wide campaign of genocide, and his had landed last. Hundreds of ships and thousands of officers and spacers had participated in the campaign to destroy the future of the Chimeri, but it was his ship that had killed the last Kenmarad. His ship that had truly doomed the Kenmarad to a slow death. And if the Chimeri were firing missiles at a planet, how bad? She whispered. We're estimating a full salvo launch from an entire fleet. Hard to get exact numbers, but at least 1,500 missiles, Inurka told her. He wasn't quite as clinical as Henry, but he didn't have the shield Sylvia's boyfriend had built up against guilt and PTSD. There was fear and anger in Inurka's voice. The Rashovans will try to stop them, but each of those missiles is likely carrying a 500 megaton fusion warhead, and they'll just keep firing. There was a long and chill silence on the channel. Sylvia shared with the two military officers. She glanced at the tactical display and checked the numbers through her internal network. 5 minutes of flight time on the part of Kenmari missiles. Another 5 minutes with their terminal velocity before they reach the planet. I'll be on the flag deck in 3 minutes, she told them. No good solution. On a similar vein to the Jimmy, why is the RN called the Andrew? UPS is an United Planets Space Force, as Glyn has just said. Name jokes somehow are less fun if the author is there to correct you. Now you stole on Star Trek's everyone is related origin of species. Dun 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 dun. That's cool inspiration. Why are they annoyed enough they're bombing a planet? Well, this is the thing. The Khmeri Empire, if I give a sort of short backstory to it, and this is really covered best in the first book, have ruled space for a long time. They ended up managing to pick a fight with both rebels internally and nation powers externally. And basically, one of the powers externally had access to technology which didn't make their ships invincible, but did allow them to take a significant amount of punishment before they would succumb. This faction then decided to looked at the Chimeri and noticed that their weakness was that they are a sort of hive race with multiple hives, but there are breeding sects, and that produce the warriors and the workers, and the scientists. But they don't have. That's not really spread out. That's all concentrated in these things, and those were also the command centers and the nerve centers of their empire. And so someone ordered a surgical strike, take out the leadership. Unfortunately, if you take out the leadership, you also take out their ability to reproduce. So, as Glenn has pointed out, it is a genocidal strike. It's a decapitation strike, but it's also a genocidal strike. And that's made them really, really annoyed. And this is the latest book in the series. I'm actually doing this out of order because this is the most recently published book. First book in the series is... Oh, it's not Raven's Peace. Not Raven's Course. Ravens. It's all about basically. It's all set on. Actually, is it Raven's Peace, which is the first one? No. Yeah, Raven's Peace is the first one. There are 5 currently in the series, but I'm told there is a 6th one going to be written soon. It's a good book. But this is not the only battle by any chance in this book, and not the only one we'll be talking about. Or rather, probably the only one we'll be talking about, because I noticed the time. And so it's on to the next book shortly. I thought also it was kind of appropriate to start off with this one, considering some dilemmas we're actually facing and we need to discuss at this moment. Because you can be entirely justified in what you do, and it can still result in your opponent being also, you can argue, justifiably distraught. And when I say entirely justified, if you're running a brutal empire which spans 14,000 plus stars, etc., and routinely depopulates planets and moves people around and basically runs on slave labor and fear of starvation to keep control, you're not exactly nice people. Oh, and you also constantly run wars of aggression to take over more territory, and that's actually how you ended up in a war with, well, how the UPSF and the United Planets Alliance end up fighting is because they're attacked, which is, again, so they're fighting. And it becomes down to a simple view where quite a lot of factions are looking at going, there is no negotiating with the Chimeri. They don't negotiate. They are massively powerful. They're also massively arrogant. And there is this small sliver of a thing that we can do, which is absolutely reprehensible to do, but it seems to be our only option to win this war and stop our own people dying. It's the same scenario which leads to you dropping nuclear weapons on Japan. And it's, yeah. Basically, it's an interesting book to dive into, and it's an interesting series to dive into, because it allows you to, when you think about it, think it through, explore quite a lot of dilemmas of modern strategy and modern discussions. It's just one of those series which you go back to and you think, oh, this is interesting. This is definitely interesting. Right now. Next one in the series is, and this is going to sound like there's almost a theme going on with Glenn's books here, because this is a book about the actual conducting. Another version of, well, okay, it's not if the operation which is conducted by the UPSF in Peacekeepers of Seoul series is a genocidal decapitation strike. Operation Medusa is about an attack which is blasting your opponent back to the Stone Age in relative space terms. It's about wiping out interplanetary communications, which is also another theme which is explored in Peacekeepers. It's sort of it. You take out the intergalactic comms network and watch your enemies disintegrate, basically, and that's dealt with in the first book of the series. In this one, that is what this is all about. Operation Medusa is about destroying that. It's in the Space Carrier Avalon series. Well, it's the Castle Federation series, but I always call it the Space Carrier Avalon because that's the first book in the series, and frankly, to me, it's like I call the Peacekeepers Assault the Raven series. I always care more about the ships in the books than I do about anything else. Now, this is a very interesting scenario because this is all between human factions. And pretty much the largest human power centered on Earth wants to bring all humans together, unity. Now, this is a problem for a lot of people because, for starters, not everyone wants to be united. It's one of those things. There is always the people ready to argue in favor of human unification, of us all working under the same government. And well, it's a case of, oh, good lord, had the Russian bots have found us. Report pornography. And this is when it's nice to have someone who's here. Remove hide user on this channel. Yeah, I don't think I've got any admins this evening. I am just promoting people to admin. Please note, if you suddenly find yourself with powers, you know why. Right then. So, leaving that to one side, and by the way, 2 new people have had their power increased to that of moderators. You may use your power scarily. Operation Medusa is about how this operation is planned, it's conducted, and it is a total way to wipe out basically the ability of this major power to actually fight. Because the communication system is pervasive. Absolutely, entirely pervasive. I could only put this on a scale of this. Imagine if you took out every satellite, every internet cable, every communications cable, every telephone mast on Earth, and then ask people how you're going to fight a battle. That's the reality of what you're dealing with. If you put that to a modern force, they'd look at you and go, we need to start rebuilding communications from scratch. If you find yourself with no new powers, that's primarily because I just haven't chatted to you enough on Discord. I picked the 2 people who I chat to the most on Discord out of this. Well, one I chat to on Discord quite a lot, and one I chatted to on WhatsApp quite a lot. So that's what I picked them because I felt they would act as me in terms of what they'd allow through if it flashes up. So let's go and read the battle. Right then, that's just fine, huh? So this is the chapter I want to read to you. James' walking stick linked his office to the office to ships surrounding him and let a victorious smile spread over his face as Tasker and Gabba appeared in his office. The projection was entirely in his head. There wasn't even a hologram of two officers there, but it looked real enough. Where are we at? He asked breathlessly. My fleet wasn't even scratched, Tasker told him. We shot off about 15% of our missile magazine, otherwise ready for combat. Hooper's reinforcements were from my fleet, Gabba pointed out. Losing those ships hurts. The rest of my ships are still scattered around the region. Should I be recalling them to here on to Niagara? 38 Fleet has shot off over 70% of their magazines, James told his subordinates. Leopold has some missiles and I have ammunition colliers in the system. But we're probably better off withdrawing to Niagara to rearm our ships. I'm absorbing both of your fleets into 38th, he continued. You'll continue to command your existing formations as Task Forces 38-2 and 38-3, but we'll move on from Niagara as a single force. Any disappointment at losing independent command was invisible as the two officers leaned forward to hear his plan. Where are we going? What's left of the 41st Fleet remains an extremely powerful force, James told them. We only actually took out Robert's flagship, after all. In trade for Hopper's entire fleet, Gabba added bitterly. Indeed, a poor trade on the surface, except that we crushed their fighters and damaged most of their ships. We return to Niagara, rearm and reconsolidate our forces. I've issued orders for most of our defensive formations to send half the units to Niagara as well. If we can eliminate their 41st and 7th fleets in one strike, the Alliance has nothing left to carry out offensive with. With how they've reinforced 7th Fleet, Tasker trade-off, they will be 50 capital ships in Via Somnia once Robert's survivors arrive. James said, 50. The Alliance can't lose 50 ships and sustain any significant offensive action, not without stripping their home system defenses to the bone. I don't intend to give them the time. He told his subordinates, it'll take us a week or so to consolidate our forces at Niagara, and then I intend to move on via Somnia with 78 capital ships. That would leave most of their frontier lightly defended. But the Senate's insistence that he pulled Tasker and Gerber back to deal with Roberts, combined with the Alliance's concentration of forces at Via Somnia, gave him a chance to end the damn war. We will smash their fleet at Via Somnia, and then move on to complete our operations against the Renaissance trade factor. He laid out. From there we'll reassess, but I expect to move against either Castle or Caroline. With the RTF and either Federation or Imperium out of the war, he was quite certain he could convince the rest of the Alliance to surrender. They have gathered their strength to make a serious attack on us, but in doing so, have given us a glorious target, James Calvin Walker-Stick assured his admirals. Time has come. We will end this war. James made certain that the quarters put aside for Admiral Roberts and his senior staff were better than the brig. They were junior officers' quarters, smaller than the 06s and above they'd kept out of the cells would be used to, but they were at least actual quarters. If the new morning saw Marines outside each door in the hallway and powered armoured fire teams at either end to make sure any escape attempt ended quickly, well, James had to take precautions. He stepped up to the door of Admiral Roberts' quarters and traded nods with the Marine Guard before hitting the eminence button. Admiral Roberts, he said, this is Marshal Walking Stick. May we speak? The door clicked open in response and James stepped into the room. The Federation Admiral laid aside a datapad as the Marshal entered, looking up at his captor. The prisoners quite distinctly did not have access to St. Michael's datanet via their implants. Even a datapad was linked to a specifically restricted library. Pretty much purely light entertainment to keep the prisoners from going crazy. I'd sell welcome to my abode, but I have no illusions about which one of us owns his room, Robert said cheerfully, a surprisingly broad grin on the prisoner's face. It's your ship, your room, God's even your own, your chairs. So you may as well sit down. James did, using amusement to cover his surprise at Robert's reaction. You seem to take captivity well, he said, dryly. Given the alternative is fire and ash, I'll take it, the castle-born man told him. I must repeat what I said earlier, though. You won't learn much of use from me. Implant security protocols being what they are, I have no intention of even trying, James told him. Roberts almost certainly knew many things of value to the Commonwealth's campaign. He would know what 7th Fleet's exact strength of Via Somnia was. He probably even knew why their surveillance platforms had been destroyed. Potentially even how they'd been localized. The stealth Q probes were, after all, supposed to be nearly invisible. But he never give up that information voluntarily, and his implant would probably kill him before he surrendered that information under torture or chemical interrogation. Walking Stick's implant would, in the other man's shoes. If you care to share any exact details of Viasomnia's defences or what forces have been sent to reinforce the trade factor, I wouldn't complain, he continued, but I have a certain degree of faith in the Alliance's security protocols, and I prefer you alive. Robert chuckled. So do I, admitted. Though I guess that I'm guessing I might regret that. Are we resurrecting the old Roman triumph, parading me in chains through the streets of Terra? James echoed the chuckle. That would take a while. Terra has a lot of streets. You are roughly correct in your role, though. You are a trophy, and a shiny one at that. When this is over, we'll probably try and convince you to put on a Commonwealth uniform. His prisoner winced. Gods, you bastards would, wouldn't you? He shook his head. Forgive me, Marshal, but I don't expect this to end in a way that has you making generous offers. James smiled flippantly. I doubt the Alliance would have fought as long and as hard as they have if you fought differently. And a lot of blood has been shed that perhaps didn't need to be, for a war that will end much the same as if you surrendered. And we clearly still think differently, Roberts pointed out with the same broad grin. We'll fight you kicking and screaming the whole way. You know that. I'm afraid of that, James admitted. But with both your fleet and Seventh Fleet at Viasomnia, you will have finally given me a target worth unleashing the full might I have been given upon. With the defeat of those fleets, the Alliance will fall. Something in Roberts' expression twisted, the grin not faltering, but smirking. The Federation animal was smirking at him. You will see, James said calmly. He just began to wonder if he could scout Viasomnia before he could arrive. If the Stellar Fox was smirking at him, there was something he didn't know. We will all see, Roberts replied. Whatever comes to pass, we will all see. Before James could respond, his implant suddenly pinged with emergency alert. What is it? He demanded carefully, not to vocalize so loud. Strategic Omega alert, McGuinness said, flatly over the neural network. Sol is under attack, so is Tau Ceti, a dozen other systems. We're still identifying where and what. James couldn't help himself. He turned accused to glare at Roberts. Ah, the Federation Admiral replied. It has begun, I see. What have you done? Unleashed Armageddon. You think you've won a great battle? Ouch. What do we do? Lindsay Tasker asked softly. The gap between her question and Mihai Gaber's response wasn't long exactly. The three flagships were floating roughly 50,000 kilometers apart, so the delay in two-way transmission was only a third of a second. James' walking stick and his officers, however, were 28th century military officers. Their neural implants were capable of allowing them to consider process time millisecond by millisecond if needed. It wasn't a feature that was healthy to use on a regular basis, but their implants gave them a precise sense of time. With a QCOM, the communication today between Taskgaber and James would have been nearly imperceptible even to them. Without it, QCOMs have been taken down. I say without we take this fleet and shove it down the Alliance's throat, Gaber snapped. They've got to have sent every damn warship they had into our space to pull this off. Their home systems have to be defenseless. James raised a hand. We cannot make our decisions based on the emotions or revenge at this point. He told his subordinates quietly, we have no updates, no information. We know nothing of what is happening in the core of the Commonwealth. And perhaps more importantly, we know nothing of what is happening on the fringes of the Commonwealth. There are worlds that were brought into unity recently enough that they will still see this as weakness, as an opportunity. We have no command and control loop, no ability to acquire intelligence, Admirals. We don't even have a real-time sense of data in this system. If we make war on the Alliance now, we will face an enemy who has all of those things. He shook his head. What information we have suggests that the Home Fleet and Terra Fortress Command are either shattered or just plain gone. Tau Ceti Sector Command is gone. Every ship was debris by the time the Alliance fleet fired on the QCOM system. Most systems are somewhat in between. The Alliance just did to the Commonwealth what we are planning to do to them at Viasomnia. The Commonwealth no longer has the ship strength to reasonably support offensive action. Tasker looked tired. So what do we do? Take our fleets back to the Sol? Help hold the Commonwealth together from the centre? James shook his head. From Gaber's expression, he knew what his marshal was thinking if Tasker hadn't caught up. I am a marshal of the Commonwealth, Lindsay, he told her. I have a very clear and distinct area of responsibility, and if I leave that area for direct authorization from the Senate, I am legally deserting my post. He chuckled. And if I were to bring a fleet with me to Sol, my commission would make That's treason, regardless of my intent, he admitted. My own personal Rubicon. What I give up for Marshal's mace, Admiral Tasker, is my general authority over the Commonwealth Navy. I have absolute authority in the Rimward marches, and am legally forbidden to command Commonwealth forces outside the marches. We can't just let the Commonwealth burn, she objected. No, we can't. However, it seems that all our plans and schemes to thwart this exact kind of attack failed. We need to consider what the final orders we sent to our people were. Gather at Niagara, Gabba replied, after the slight but all too noticeable delay. All of our secondary forces were heading there. And that is where the Senate will expect to find us as well. If they do have new orders for us, for now we will return to Niagara. What were our plans for this kind of attack, Tasker asked. My people have checked. Every entangled particle block in the fleet is dead, spewing garbage radiation data if they're receiving anything at all. The Uranus facility was our emergency continuity of government facility, the Marshal replied. Officially, it didn't exist, and only current or former designated flagships even had entangled blocks for it. But the Alliance knew where it was. It was the first one they took out, he noted grimly. We only had one secret facility, Gabba asked. James chuckled. We were supposed to have three, one in Sol, one in Tau Ceti, and one in Cirrus. There's nothing in Cirrus, Gabba directed. That was the point, James chuckled bitterly. The program was cancelled after the Uranus platform because we discovered the Federation was building 80 million cubic warships. The budget was put into building the Ambrosias. Not that those seemed to help. The destruction of both super battleships and the defense of Ceres was one of the confirmed losses from the Battle of Sol. We fall back to Niagara, and we get our prisoners off our warships. He continued. Niagara had proper prisoner of war facilities in orbit, thankfully. There's too many people with potential access to them while they're on board our ships. You don't trust our people? Gabba demanded. Our prisoners wear the same uniforms as the people who just attacked Sol, Mihai. James said flatly. Some people are not going to be thinking rationally. We have obligations to our prisoners of war, and we will see them respected. Even if, in the back of his head, James Walkingstick suspected that Carl Roberts had more than little to do with the chaos that had just been unleashed upon the galaxy. Carl was amused that the man with quite literally life or death authority over him still asked permission to enter the tiny quarters they locked him in. Unless he missed his guess, the room they'd put him in was normally shared by 2 lieutenants or similarly larval officers, but they'd scooped out a bed in favour of a couch when they decided to put an admiral in there. Even as a prisoner of war, rank had its privileges. They didn't, he expected, actually rescind to refusing Walkingstick entry to his all quarters, but at least the Marshal asked. Well? Walkingstick demanded as the door closed behind him, looking at Carl like he wanted to ask a long question, or potentially like the Terran officer wanted to strangle him with his bare hands. Given what it sounded like the events of the last 12 hours had entailed, that was also quite possible. Well, what, he asked. Don't you want to know how your alliance's grand offensive, the plan I can see your fingerprints all over, went off? Walkingstick asked. Carl sighed and leaned back in the couch, gesturing around him. Marshal, I have a datapad that is linked to an entertainment library that is nothing less than 10 years old on it, and 4 walls that make for a somewhat comfortable prison, he pointed out. At this point, unless an Alliance fleet has arrived and forced you to surrender, the result of the war isn't going to change my fate. He didn't want to know, but he also... He did want to know, but he also didn't. If Medusa had failed, he had doomed his nation allies to the dustbin of history. The Terran officer chuckled bitterly. That hasn't happened, so far as I know, but since I no longer have real-time sensor data, he shrugged. Your people did it, Walkingstick concluded. You may have single-handedly wrecked the largest human civilization in history, Admiral Roberts. The entire Commonwealth Q-com network is down. Do you have any idea how many people this will kill? The Commonwealth requires all their systems to be self-sufficient in food and basic industry, Carl replied, pushing down a momentary desire to close. I think your civilization will survive just fine. You saw what happened in Presley, the Marshal told him. 12 systems will go up in flames now, maybe 24. Ships will mutiny, the Commonwealth will tear itself apart. Millions are going to die, Admiral Roberts. You can argue everything you destroyed was a legitimate military target, but the blood of those innocents is on your people's hands. And whose hands is the blood of the Chematians on, Carl asked. He'd watched the Terran battleship sear that world with antimatter fire. He'd hunted the ship responsible down and destroyed it. He'd admitted the captain had gone rogue, but without Walkingstick's war. Ours, Walkingstick admitted without flinching. Mine, even. It shouldn't have happened, Admiral Roberts. Unification, bringing all the cabinets together, is how we stop things like that. And now you've set more of those flames in motion. You give me a bit too much credit, Carl replied. He drafted Medusa, but he'd been one of over 30 officers in the Joint Strategic Operations Command, and hundreds of thousands of spaces, starfighter crew, and officers had carried out the mission. Speed, aggression, and shock, used as psychological weapons, Walkingstick said. Dryly, I can see the mind behind tranquility and husing in this strike, Admiral. Other hands may have carried it out, but I know the fingerprints of the architect. Terran shook his head. You remind me of myself, though with a poorer luck in birthplaces, I suppose, he told Carl. What do you expect? Carl told him. I quite like where I was born, Marshal, but someone wrote a treatise on aggression and calculated risk of psychological warfare in modern carrier combat as a military strategy theory thesis, and it wasn't me. Walking Stick stared at him for a long, long moment. That should never have left the Commonwealth, he said. Apparently ended up in the Castle Federation's Academy Library, Carl replied. If I remind you of yourself, Marshal, it's because I read your damn book. They glared at each other for several moments, then Walking Stick sighed and shook his head. You realize that I can no longer trust my people to take proper care of yours, he admitted. We're returning to the Niagara system, where I will be turning your people over to a civilian prison authority. I believe I can rely on their restraint more than my own people's, he sighed. If nothing else, they have a smaller proportion of people actually from Sol, he noted. Attacking the home system has made your alliance no friends, Admiral. You came for our homes, Carl told him fiercely. You came for our independence, our freedom, our right to live as we choose. You burned our worlds, killed our brothers and sisters, and you tell me that we have made ourselves no friends? Every drop of blood shed in this war and whatever consequences this unleashes come back not only to the Commonwealth, but to the man who set them in motion, he snapped, watching Walking Stick recoil in surprise. Your choice, Walking Stick. Your war. You want to blame us for that? Look in a God's cursed mirror. For a seemingly eternal moment, their gazes locked again, then Walking Stick inclined his head in a single sharp nod, and simply turned sharply on his heel, leaving Carl alone in his cell. His Operation Medusa had succeeded. The tide of war was changing. If only he knew what the price was going to be for himself. It's a very, very good book. But it's also a very good series to read, and it does really reveal the fact that, and really highlight the fact that once you let the cat out the bag, war can go wherever it wants to. War can happen. Right. Alistair Shaw, unlimited power, teeny weeny chat space. Well, yes, I've only got about 38 people watching, so it's unlimited power over 36 other people. Glenn Stewart, aiming was their big problem. If you're targeting based on lightspeed data and your enemy is targeting instantaneous data, one of you is in real trouble at 10, 20, 30 light seconds. Yep. Exactly, Melanie. I had to admit that's why I did consider making you an admin as well, but I thought then I'd be forcing you to use that power, and I didn't think that would be. I thought that'd be a bit cruel. Hello, Thistle. And oh, this is another one of the Peacekeeper series. The next one. Lots of people discussing the fact that people follow GPS into rivers, into lakes. They do all sorts of fun things. GPS is really, really cruel sometimes to some people. Yeah, I know. Drac is trying to get through all his questions. He's doing all sorts of lives. I always say this about Unity. I have nothing against the theory of Unity, United Earth, United this, United that. They, in theory, they sound like a lovely idea. The thing is, they have to be chosen. I don't think you can force unity. And it's one of the things why I'm always happy to allow not allow, but think the things like referendums, etc. If you want to have a referendum on whether you stay as part of something, yeah, have it. But referendum is a necessity. Yeah. Hi, Sean. Hi, Jack. No, hi, Sean. Hi, Stafford. Yes, Glyn and Jack have both had to be promoted because we were. How do I put this? We were descended on by Russian bots. Hello, Dan. Yes, now I have lots of. You see, now the Russian bots have gone. Now I have lots of admin in the chat. Is this an all Glyn reading list? Actually, it is, but that's mainly because I'm winding up Glyn as well. And because his books are good. I do have others. I do have a few other books, and I will be doing ones which are not Glyn at some point. But I'm doing Glyn ones because also his come with good art. Dear Richards, I just finished Anabasis on horsemanship. Very interesting. You mean not the sort of referendum? No. Referendums which involve you going around with guns to people's houses to collect votes do not tend to be good referendums. Avan Soto just bought Raven's Peace. Oh, you're going to enjoy this. I like Glyn's books because they're very good for teaching strategic thinking. And as I've told people before and said on this channel several times, I use sci-fis to teach strategic thinking quite often. I start off with a science fiction one, then I go to a very old historical example, and then a more recent historical example, and then a current event. And so basically, I start people off thinking, and then when they get to the current event, if they're starting to behave in a sort of but this is my side must be right because they're my side way, I go, hang on, remember this and this and this we've already discussed. And then it's a case of, oh. And it's a case of you teach the logic and the thinking, the way to think these things through. Yeah. Now, Drifter's Folly has one of the coolest battles you will ever read about in. Because, and I say this in the nicest way, Drifter's Folly is just a cool battle. And the reason I say cool is because there is this battle at the end where you have destroyers, and again, I would like to point out, this is another reason I like this book, is I have been told exactly the kind of ships which Glyn has based these destroyers off, so I have an affinity for them. I would actually call one of these chapters Tribals in Space, quite shamelessly. Okay, this is chapter 50. For the second time in less than 24 hours, Henry's ships blasted past 10,000 kilometers per second and cut their acceleration. This time, they were hurtling towards Blue First Dawn Beta and the Chimeri fleet waiting for them. Now, Blue First Dawn Beta is the name of a convoy. You don't need to know much about them, other than the drifters are sort of this space-based race. They live in space. And their convoys are given Cullen designations as their names. That felt strangely right in a way that many of Henry's battles in the last few years hadn't. The Chimeri had been the enemy for most of his adult life, and while he regretted what he'd done to them as a species, he was unsurprised to see them back. Range is 1 light minute, Eowyn reported calmly. We're closing at 10,000 kilometers per second. Current acceleration 0.02 kps squared. enough to keep their gravity drive up and smear their thermal signature across thousands of kilometers of space. The Khemiri are smart, Henry murmured. They'll see us coming sooner rather than later. Hopefully not soon enough, right? His ops officer asked. He smiled predatorily. They're already too late, I suspect, he told her. Time to weapons range? Our base velocity puts missile range at over 3.5 million kilometers, sir. She noted. 24 minutes. And laser range, she asked. 5 minutes after that, we'll hit two light seconds, Ewan told him. And we're clear through laser range in 2 minutes, Henry calculated aloud. And once we're past them, nobody's missiles are hitting anybody. Unless the Khemiri had dramatically upgraded their missile launchers, they gave their missiles the same initial 1,000 kilometers per second as his did. Against a base velocity of 10,000 kilometers per second, the missile didn't have a delta V to play with catch up. He leaned back in his chair and laced his fingers together, studying both the big tactical displays on the screens around him and the additional layers fed into it by his internal network. Battle stations meant there were no true holograms visible anywhere on the flag deck. The tech was still too fragile for the UPSF's designers to include as part of their combat systems, but his network implants could duplicate the effect. Inerka, Tiernison, he greeted his captains. Well, we're well past the time to tell me if you have a problem, but now's the time for concerns or suggestions. There's a lot of damn metal over there, Commodore, Inerka said grimly. 2 super dreadnoughts. We got the escort number wrong. I make it 8 escorts and 4 gunships. This is going to hurt. Them, Henry replied. Ignore the escorts and gunships. We tank their fire on the grav shields and focus our lasers on the target Bravo. We can do this, Tennyson said, but there was a shakiness to her voice. Marafa's captain was senior to Inerka. Paladin was Henry's flag captain, first command. But Henry knew Inerka had seen more action. There was a reason he picked the brand new lieutenant colonel as his flag captain, after all. Yes, we can, Henry told her. And the drifters? No way to tell if they got our message, Henry admitted, but if they did, they'll be kicking off in about 30 minutes. They're almost 4 light minutes from the drifter convoy. The Khemri detachment would probably have instantaneous communications, but if it worked the same way as the listening post system, Henry would know when the super dreadnoughts told the convoy escorts they were in trouble. Part of him hoped that the warrior in command of the ships in front of him would underestimate him, that they'd see 2 destroyers and assume there was no real danger. But the Khemiri were smart, and the warriors were good at what they did. The Khemiri commander would almost certainly make the same assumption versus Henry's 2 destroyers that he'd made versus their 2 super dreadnoughts, that the operation wouldn't have been launched without a plan for success. Missile range in 10 minutes, Ian reported. Range is in 9.7 million kilometers. Khemiri force has not yet reacted to our approach. No active scans have been detected. Henry could live with the Khemiri seeing his ships earlier than he wanted. Active scans, though, would be a pain in the arse. Now we wait, he told his captains and flag captain staff. We wait and we see if the Khemiri are half as clever as I think they are. Missile range. The 2 calm words hung in the silence of the flag deck. Even Henry was trying not to hold his breath as he checked the countdown. 30 seconds to point Weber. Checks are commencing. Do we fire? Inerka asked. Negative. They'd see it now. We wait until we're seen, or we hit Weber. Dial in target Bravo as closely as you can without active sensors and prepare to go to full thrust. 15 seconds. 10, 5. Weber. Salvo 1 activating. Ewan barked. Salvo 2 activating. Salvo 3 activating. The chant echoed through the flag deck as salvo after salvo of pre-laced missiles lit off their drives. They'd been fired ahead of Henry's ships. Their launch velocity adjusted to match his planned 10,000 kilometers a second approach. Now 20 full salvos from his 2 ships, 700 missiles, came to life and hurtled towards target Alpha at their maximum 10 kps acceleration, and their max activation sequences had been carefully programmed. Those 700 missiles didn't come at the Super Dreadnought as 20 separate salvos. They came in as a single coordinated time-on-target salvo, screaming in almost 2 million kilometers ahead of Henry's 2 ships. Enemy defense is active, Ewan reported. Damn, that was fast. They were already up, Henry replied. Khemri don't shut them down. They're heavily armed professional paranoids. Impact? And please note, I am the person who teaches students and teaches my class regularly. It's not paranoid if someone's really out to kill you. So that's not paranoid, that's good sense. And the odds are, if you're doing anything of value in the world, someone doesn't like you doing it. They might not be out to kill you, but they certainly would not prefer you not to doing it. So it's not what we call being paranoid. It's good sense to have a healthy level of consideration going on and sensible security. 60 seconds and counting, she snapped. Enemy defensive lasers are firing. I have active center sweeps. They're looking for us. Inerka, Tierson, now please. Destroyer Squadron 27 came to life in the wake of their missiles. Gravity shields went to full power. 12,000 gravity defense shears snapped into existence and tearing the incoming sensor data to pieces for a moment before the computers compensated. Gravity maneuvering systems went from a trickle of minimum power to full strength. Active scanners flickered to life as well, responding to Khemiri radar and LiDAR with scanning beams of their own. All laser capacitors report full on both ships. And told Henry, your first salvos on Target Bravo away. Defensive network is online. Enemy escorts are pushing forward to cover Target Alpha from the Weber salvo. It won't be enough, Henry said flatly. He was right. He had to be right. He'd built the entire plan around the fact that his enemy wasn't expecting an attack and he didn't know what warning signs to look for to find 2 GMS ships. That's gravity maneuvering system ships. That had led him to set up a single salvo with a third of his squadron's missiles. We're losing missiles fast. We're coming in fast, but their defensive gunners are good. They're Khemiri, Henry snapped. Leave Weber to the onboard AIs. Run the defensive algorithms, Ian. We're coming into the teeth of way too many missiles. The Khemiri had nailed down Desron 27's locations as the UPSF missiles drove home, and now 300 missiles blazed into space to return the favor. That's the difference between a pair of dreadnoughts and a pair of destroyers. A pair of destroyers can stack up 700 missiles. A pair of dreadnoughts can just launch 300. It was the last salvo Target Alpha would ever launch. The systems had been online and Khemiri gunnery teams were good, but they hadn't been expecting an attack. The missiles hurtling in at over 12,000 kps were a challenge at best of times. 300 of Henry's missiles reached Target Alpha and vanished from three-dimensional space. He put every single penetrator missile his squadron had on that strike, and even a super dreadnought wasn't about able to handle that. Target Alpha is holy sugar plums. Glenn language. Ewan whispered. Target Alpha is gone. Dozens of 500 megaton warheads detonated between the capital ship's 2 layers of shields, but dozens more detonated inside her armor. When the explosions cleared, a 16 million ton super dreadnought had been completely vaporized. We have incoming plasma fire. Henry wasn't sure which one of Ewan's team had barked the alert. In almost the same moment, a dozen red flashing warning lights appeared on his screen. No blow-through in Erica Snap, but they came way too close. The missiles were right on the plasma blast's heels, detonating in their own shaped charged plasma blast that washed over the gravity shield like a breaking tsunami. Power then spasmed around Henry and more warning lights flashed up on his screen. Blow through, the destroyer's captain said almost unnecessary. Lasers are still up and it's our turn now. The dreadnought had big plasma guns, both longer range and more powerful than Henry was used to. They'd hit at almost 700,000 kilometers, but both his ships had survived. There are warning signs scattered across both his ship's schematics in the displays. Target Alpha's death hadn't been without consequences, but both his destroyers were still entirely in the fight, and their lasers stabbed across the void towards the Target Bravo. Target is evading. Target is returning fire. For every beam Henry's command flung at the Khemiri, the Super Dreadnought alone flung 10 back. The escorts added another 20, but the gravity shields twisted the photons and flung them away. Super Dreadnought is lighter on beams than projected. Ewan said grimly. 40 versus 45 expected. Just as many turrets, though. Those turrets were on full rapid fire now, spitting near sea blasts of plasma at Henry's ships. For the first time since taking command of Captivax, Henry truly appreciated how powerful the new ship's shields were. He commanded Panther at the end of the war, a Jaguar-class battlecruiser a generation behind Raven, designed to fight a Khemiri dreadnought and win without significant damage. Panther would still have been obliterated in the first salvos from these super dreadnoughts, but the Catrafax had more powerful shields than even Raven. Shields the wartime battlecruisers would have killed for, and those shields shrugged aside the super dreadnought's massive beams and plasma cannons as the 2 destroyers hurtled into the heart of the enemy formation. We're through their shields, Inerka snapped from the bridge as Paladin's paired lasers were finally carried to a range where even the super dreadnought's mighty energy screens failed. Iron and ceramics boiled away as the beams hammered into the Henry ship's hull, cutting massive gouges through her. Then the shields were back up. At that point, failing elsewhere as Marafa's beams repeated the feat. We're too close. The lasers are getting closer and Henry didn't need to check his scans. He knew that sudden silence. At the ranges they were in now, the gravity shield couldn't stand up to direct laser fire for long, and they were being hammered with missiles every few seconds. Their own missiles were too few, and Marafa's was gone. 400 of his people were gone with her, but he couldn't grieve. Not yet. We're clear, Nurka barked. We're past. Their missiles can't catch up. Keep the lasers on her. 60 seconds, people. We have to make it 60 more seconds. Okfar Nurka's command twisted in the dim light of Blue First Dawn's largest planet like a worm on a hook. Lasers and plasma scattered in the void around her, as many shots missing as being tossed aside by the shield, but our own beams stayed on the super dreadnought, burning through once again as they fled. Escorts and gunships are accelerating pursuit. Estimate 1.7 kps squared. Not enough, Henry murmured. Did we? Did we do it, Akfar? Silence answered him. The range ticked over 2 light seconds, and Paladin's beams vanished. The Khemri weapons still plopped their space around her, but there was a dull silence aboard the destroyer as their own weapons calmed. Scans are focused on the super dreadnought, confirmed quietly. Escorts are in hot pursuit. They're gaining a lot of speed, but they're not closing range. Do we let them? Hang out a trail, Captain. The later they realise that we've done what they've done, the less they can do. But I need to know, did it work? Scans complete. Target Bravo's engines are completely disabled. Her vector is towards Blue First Dawn Beta. Tactical is estimating 35 minutes to the crush depth. Henry smiled coldly and looked at his escorts chasing him. Unless your engineers are even better than I think they are, you should not be chasing me, he told their icons. Basically, they've taken out the engines of the Super Dreadnought, and so it'll be plunging into the sun. Very quickly. Energy screens, unlike gravity shields, transferred a portion of the momentum of the impacts to a protected bubble. The momentum was transferred across the entire bubble, so it was rarely registered on the inside, but every missile that had detonated, seemingly useless against Target Bravo's shields, had pushed the Super Dreadnought ever so slightly towards the planet beneath her. And the lasers done the same, and been targeted on Super Dreadnought's engines, with a precision only enabled by the Drifter's near-perfect data on those exact ships. Now Target Bravo fell. It wasn't a fast process at first, but it accelerated slowly. 10 minutes after Paladin left laser range, the Super Dreadnought touched the top of Blue First Dawn Beta's atmosphere, and they finally called the escort back. It's too late, Aeon said grimly. 10 minutes just to shed their velocity, another 20 to get back and match V with the target, Bravo. They're only going to get there in time to watch her die. No, Henry countered. They're going to get there in time to pick up the escape pods and evac shuttles, and I'm glad to see it, honestly. He couldn't see Target Bravo directly anymore. Paladin had put the gas giant between herself and the Super Dreadnought, shielding herself from any clever ideas the Khemri might have had at the last minute. They were watching through a sensor drone on the other side of the planet, which put everything several minutes out of date. Escape pods and shuttles were starting to flee the Super Dreadnought now. Even combined, the small craft wouldn't have had enough for us to move the immense mass of their mothership. But they could get the crew clear. Glad, sir? Ewan asked. I hate the Khemri, Henry admitted aloud. He didn't even like to hear himself say it, but it's true. I hate everything they've done, everything they stand for, everything they created, but I also destroyed any future their race had. The Khemri who died today cannot be replaced, Commander Aeon. He looked at the scans of the doomed Super Dreadnought, surprised at the emotions he was feeling. I will fight them without hesitation. I will stand against all their works in any attempt to restore their power, but I will not hasten their demise any more than I must. We are already well revenged. I hope those captains have the moral courage to retreat once they've picked up the evacuees. He shook his head. They could still win, he admitted, or at the very least destroy Paladin. But a lot of the people they're pulling from the wreck of that Super Dreadnought would die along the way. If they want Paladin, they'll bleed for her. Yes, sir. Henry turned his attention to the other situations. Chan, do we have any updates from the Drifter convoy? Nothing yet, sir. On the other hand, Target Bravo pulsed the subspace message right after Target Alpha was destroyed, the comms officer told him, and they never got a response. I think our Mars friends may have done all right. They better have. Henry considered the situation for a few minutes. Captain Erka, set your course for the blue stripe, green stripe, orange stripe convoy. He ordered. We'll keep an eye on our Khemri friends, but it's time to start wrapping this up. It's good. But again, it's there's not an easy win in this scenario. Half the squadron destroyed. They win, but half the squadron is destroyed. It was originally accidental, but after I read your book, I leaned into it for Remenant Faction. Naval, this is making a pleasant change from my afternoon of being John Lambert's British weapons, reading John Lambert's British Weapons of World War II, Escort and Minesweeper Weapons. That is very good. I have that book. Blue First Dawn is a planet. I know, I got that. I misremembered that one. And then I read it and went, oh, no, it's a gas giant, isn't it? Sorry. I chuckled the first time I read you. You fight with what you have, not what you want in Glyn's books. Yeah, that's been a mantra of British naval historians for a long time. Dan Freeman, at least if they have a Southwest London accent, you can be pretty sure they'll answer to Alex. Most good people that answer to Alex, they understand a good name when they hear it. Mm-hmm. Let's do it. My officers swear like a candle's not sailors, I'm told. I would say sailors tend to be slightly more creative. Two super battleships for one destroyer. That's like it. Hit the member cell, hit the Discord for advice on making my next novel. You would be surprised, and I know I was when I started talking about writing, etc. in Discord. The amount of people who are writing novels, who are in there, who are historians writing, and I'm sort of going, it's a really cool crowd, and I love the amount of academics I now get mentioning, going, oh yeah, this is my name on your Discord server. Yes, I've joined your Discord server, and I'm going, okay, I didn't realize professors had Discord accounts. Listen, I did not get the what do you have, not what you want from Alex. No. There are a few other historians who have been saying this before me, and I think probably he got that from himself, actually, knowing Glyn. Jack Ray, yes, Jan. One of them comes after eating too much Taco Bell. Yeah, that wouldn't surprise you. Now, this book is good because it does show the link between diplomacy and whatever things, but also shows the advantage of sometimes the small ships. Sometimes, would they be super destroyers out of it? I think armored cruiser would have suited them better. Just seems a little too much. No, let's go read. If you read the series, Stafford, and I think you would seriously enjoy the series. You will learn how powerful the battle cruisers are, and how powerful. I have to say, I'm currently doing some of my own writing on this series because I'm producing something together. I've decided I'm going to give Glyn a staff course, which could be set in this world for him. So just to see he has it as extra material because I just thought it'd be cool. And yeah, it's fun. The amount of interesting things going on is fun. Anak, how many of the academics in your Discord server look down on your YouTube career? Let's put it this way, none on the Discord server are that kind of style, but I would say that the fact is the ones on the Discord server are definitely in a minority. We'll leave that to one side, though. So, earlier I was talking to you, I gave you the end of this series, really, of the Castle Federation series book, and this is book 5 of the Castle Federation. And it does go into the Dakotan. The Castle Federation then turns into the Dakotan Confederacy series, which is another very good series. And I honestly have not read anything of the next book in the Dakotan Confederacy series, but I would say for anyone, it's a very, very good series. Okay, I never wanted to write for a career. Now I write a lot of code. Mm-hmm. Take care, Amelia. Hope you enjoyed. Melanie, I honestly find it funny because those same ones also dispute whether or not I get any funding from YouTube. So it's kind of interesting. Minister, do we shrink our main weapon and maintain its 7% of light speed velocity, or keep its current length and get up to 10% of the light speed? Oh, Glyn, that's not even a question. That's never a question. You go for the 10% of the light speed. You no, don't take this the wrong way, Glenn. That would never be a question that any naval officer or procurement would ever ask. Set up a 7%, which we're already using, or go for something which is almost 50% faster than what we're currently using, and will therefore, especially if you're considering 10% of light speed, the amount of energy that will hit with, you go with it. How many naval metaphors does it take to? No, I'm basically because I'm almost doing it as a returning the favor because I realized I use Glyn's books quite so often, and a few other books. The other author who I would have considered doing this for has actually I've reading his books, using his books more lately as well. But unfortunately, he's died, so I can't really do anything for him. Do anything as a sort of a return the favor for him. But I felt like Glyn, I should return the favor a bit. Habits might exist, Glyn, but yes, it's lovely to shrink, but no, you want to go bigger and faster. Right then. So, Rimward Stars. And Rimward Stars is one of those interesting books to read. If you have read the first four books, it makes sense, and you need to read it to really understand the whole series. But, and I would say this in the nicest way, it's also one of those books where you could get quite easily very lost if you haven't read the series. Because, and I'd say this in my experience in reading most of, um, there are some books in every series where every series ever produced by any author that there are some books which are pretty much could be standalone. You could jump into the series at that point and be fine. And there are some books where there is just so much being covered that you need the background knowledge of having at least read the book before it. Now, let's see, where shall we start? Let's start with Chapter 47. At this point, it appears that all of Koti's forces have been concentrated in KDX 6647 system, Carl told the three heads of the state in his wall screens. The resources now present in that system represent a major leap forward for this sector, and it is the official position of the Alliance that those resources properly belong to the people of the Quebecois Bien. Translation: we'll take out Koti and liberate the planet, but then you're going to have to negotiate with whoever ends up in charge there. What about KDX 66757? Premier Yamos asked. The facility that Koti's people have set up there is of some value. It was built with stolen resources, Sultan Osman pointed out, and sits halfway between our systems. Uses a base to raid us both. I'm leaving a small detachment of Alliance Marines to guard the prisoners and secure the station. The ultimate disposition of system and station is up to you. I would suggest, President Fanama Johnson, leader of Serengeti, cut in, that we arrange a mutual ownership of the station. It is a fueling platform, after all, that all of us may find useful. If we take it over as a joint facility under the free trade zone rules, it also will not become a threat to any of us. That makes sense, Osman agreed. Yilmaz didn't look too happy, but he agreed his acquiescence. Right now, none of the three core powers of the free trade zone had the military strength to force their desires on the others, or on any of their neighbours, which was going to have consequences for the FDA of free trade zone going forward. Consequences, frankly, which weren't going to be Carl's problems. What do we know about Quebec SBM? Johnson asked. I find the concept of an entire world in our region that none of us knew about disturbing, to say the least. We don't have much, Carl admitted. Our intelligence people put a lot of data and historical information about the system from Limit computers, but there was nothing close to a full archive there. We'll learn more once we have liberated the system, I'm sure. Until then, all we really know is that they were found by a trillionaire who wanted to set up his own perfect society, and that they didn't have the technology to stop the Koti's mercenaries when they decided to set up a shop as planetary dictators. We owed him our assistance, Johansson insisted. Koti was ours. Serengeti specifically. We will do what we can to help. First, Koti needs to be removed, Osman pointed out. Do you have a plan, Captain? We have some information on the system and positioning of his forces, but we are 6 days' travel away and expect all of them to be obsolete upon arrival, Cal told the leaders. Captain von Lambert, Commodore Tishumish, and I will establish a better strategy on our trip there, but it'll be necessary for us to scout the system before finalizing our plans. How can you trust this Tukumish? Yelas demanded. The blood of our soldiers and citizens is on his hands, and the blood of his crew is on Koti's, Johansson reminded him. I will not trust him to guard my system against the horrors of the void, but he will pursue Koti to the end of the stars for his revenge and his honor. I know his type, the woman finished. As do I, Carl agreed. We can crush Tukumish, I think. Past that, I intend to permit him to leave your space in exchange for his assistance, but that is all. The Commonwealth remains the enemy of the Alliance. They have committed acts of war and treachery in our space as well, Osman told him. Istanbul will speak to the leaders of the Alliance to see what aid we can provide in this war. The Commonwealth will find they have only broadened the scope of this war they have begun. My council will be voting in the morning, Johansson told them. A declaration of war against terror and a measure to join the Alliance of Free Stars is on the agenda. We will not permit the Commonwealth's actions here to go without response. Yilmaz sighed. The pudgy leader of the Antioch looked unhappy, but he nodded slowly. Similar measures have been suggested in my own parliament, he admitted. If my fellows in the free trade zone are tall walking this path, then I find myself unable to stand against them. The Alliance will welcome your aid and your support, Carl told him. He wasn't sure of the free systems, now completely lacking in the ability to project force, would actually be useful members of the Alliance, but they wouldn't turn aside anyone at this point. If nothing else, the morale benefit to the Alliance populations of new systems signing up in the middle of the war with the most powerful nation in human space could not be understated. We must deal with Koti first, he continued. All of this depends on removing the spectre of his plans from the region and liberating Quebec's bin. I suggest that we all send troop detachments to KDX 6657 to take over the security of the station, Osman said. While they are en route, we can come to some agreement on the judicial fate of the prisoners, but that is not a conversation we need Captain Roberts for. You have a liberation plan, Captain, Johansson agreed. Know that our hopes and thoughts are with you. If there is any aid any of us can give, let us know. Much as we would rather say ourselves, it seems the future of our systems now rests on you. May the eternal stars watch your path. Good, always love some international diplomacy. I've seen easier targets in the Imperial War College's Kawashi Maru scenario list, von Lambert observed. The Imperial officer linked into the conference aboard a Kodiak by QCOM. His XO and CAG shared the wall screen with him. The two wing commanders under Herzog in the room were with them currently off screen. We have a similar list, Carl agreed, and this place puts most of us those to shame. Kyoyashi Maru scenarios were suicide missions used in training exercises. Generally, their purpose was to teach prospective officers to recognize when to cut their losses. Though some of them were set up so that clever thinking could win the day, most of the offensive scenarios in that list, however, were designed to force officers to accept lesser victories rather than to lose ships and lives, trying to actually succeed at the official objective. The defences around Quebec-Bien put most of those to shame. The Coty had clearly been determined to make sure that no one took their little corner of the galaxy away from them, and the addition of Poseidon to the defenders didn't help. Layer networks of manned and automated platforms surrounded both the planet and the high orbital shipyards. The defences of any major allied system would be more modern, but few systems Carl had seen had defences this dense. The battlecruiser and 12 Corsairs had been orbiting with the shipyards when the QCOM connected to the KDX 6657 had been cut. Any of them might have moved, but it wasn't going to make too much difference. Good news, Nebula pointed out, is that I don't think Coty will have expected us to get quite so much information out of the computers here. In all honesty, we wouldn't have on our own, and neither would the Terrans. Combined, however, we got everything. And they had a lot of data in here on those defences, he continued. More than was wise, really. Thankfully, pirates have a horrible sense of information security, Taggart agreed. Given that they had an entire planet, are these people really pirates, Song asked. That's a lot more resources and firepower than a pirate fleet would normally command. There are almost 2,000 defensive platforms in orbit. And they're all obsolete garbage, Sterling pointed out. None of them have lances over the 300 kiloton range. The missile launchers were loaded with home-built 800 gravity weapons. They might have updated some of them, but it's unlikely they reloaded 400 platforms. The Terrans didn't give them that many missiles. They'll have been building their own, Carl replied. We have to assume that those platforms are carrying modern Stormwinds or their near equivalent. The truth, however, is that we can deal with the platforms. The mobile defences are critically vulnerable to long-range missile fire, and intel suggests a far lower proportion of manned control systems than we would have accepted. But we can't do it while 12 raiders, a battlecruiser, and an ungodly number of katanas swarm us, Song concluded. We know we can take up the raiders in one pass with Williams bombers. Can we justify keeping them secret at this point? Carl glanced over at Williams, the wing commander, sitting quietly with her fellows but looking eager. Commander Williams, how would you stack your ships up against Poseidon, he asked her. It depends, she admitted slowly. At maximum range, she has 10 minutes to respond to our launch. That's more than enough time to fire missiles and get fighters into space for a missile defense. A Commonwealth group will be in space even completely surprised in 3 minutes, von Lambert pointed out. But these aren't Commonwealth pilots. They're conscripts, and conscripts who are so ill-trusted, their computers are programmed to lie to them. Let's be generous and say it would take 5 minutes for them to deploy, Carl suggested. They still have 30 starfighters in space to block Williams' salvo. Coty has seen torpedoes in action now. He's going to expect capital ship-grade jammers and brains. We might still take her out, but then we also have to protect the bombers from Poseidon's fighters. So we fire at 5 minutes flight time? Instead of 10, Michelle replied. We take out the cruiser before she launches fighters. And how exactly are we going to sneak 24 bombers to 500,000 kilometers away from her? We don't. We go with a base velocity at least 2,000 kilometers per second, Michelle told her boss. That gives us over 1 million kilometer range at 5 minutes flight time. We can come out of Albuquerque with that, Carl told the others, but to get within even 1 million kilometers of Poseidon, we need to know exactly where she is, and we will be at risk from her lancers at that range. You need her looking somewhere else, von Lambert said sorry, and we need live data. There's only one way to manage both. You always know that's going to be fun. As the air in itself and the chariot's bridge started to tear apart and scream, James concluded that Carl Roberts was possibly the craziest bastard he'd ever met. At no point in the Commodore's entire career had he ever attempted to thread the needle and ride the careful balance of stabilizers and mass singular balancing necessary to emerge from Albuquerque Drive inside the generally designated gravity well of a planet or a star. From the intel reports he read, it was starting to become the Stellar Fox's default tactic, and James had allowed himself to be talked into it. We can't hold this together much longer, Arsenault said over the channel. We only just replaced the stabilizers and we're close to losing them. 60 more seconds, Motor told him. You've got to hold it together for 60 more seconds, Commander. James winced as the screaming noise edged up another octave, his implants automatically shielding his ears to prevent damage. Why did we agree to this, he demanded. Because we all got guilty conscience over helping Cody, Chariot's captain suggested, and because the whole scheme is insane? What's one more crazy stunt? It's very Stellar Fox, James agreed. Hang on, Arsenal suddenly snapped. We've lost too many stabilizers. I'm dropping the warp and this is going to hurt. The universe broke around James Tuckamish. He felt his own flesh twisting as reality tried to object to the sudden reintrusion of Chariot's bulk and presence, and saw something resembling a screen. And then it was over, the screens and tactical feeds lighting to life as Chariot emerged into real space. Barely 1.5 million kilometers from Quebec's being. Target on all screens. If it's armed, take it out. Fire at will. Modestet snapped. The emergence had been hell, but it had left them with a significant base velocity as they hurtled into the planet's orbits. Chariot's positron lances flaring to life as they entered range of the orbital platforms. Antimatter tore through empty space, and the missile and lance platforms started to come apart, dozens of satellites vaporizing as Chariot charged. Q-probes deployed, the tactical officer announced, relaying data to the one in our cargo bay. Solution to the lack of trust between the Alliance and Terran forces had been simple in the end. A single Alliance Q-probe, modified with a tamper-proof self-destruct device, sat inside one of Chariot's cargo bays. A similar probe sat inside Kodiak's bays. All the data from Chariot's probes were retransmitted at that probe, and then sent it over to Kodiak and Foth. Sugar. We've got 4 coursers dead ahead, Modestet announced. Scramble fighters. 20 of the tiny craft blasted into space instantly, but the next 2 squadrons were still loading as Chariots careened into lance range of 3 pirate ships. Missiles came with her, launched as soon as the probes and sensors identified the ships, but the raiders had been more awake than many of the defensive platforms. Their own missiles blazed into space and the lances lit up. Hitting the missiles with the override codes, Chariot's tactical officer paused. Got barely half. I think they're running out of missiles we gave them. Chariot's defenses could take 9 missiles, and the raiders didn't even launch fighters. It was a lance duel now, and that was an environment the strike cruiser was built for. A raider came apart as Terran ships' heavier beams hammered them on approach, and then the strike cruiser lurched as a beam struck home. We got the second wave of fighters out. What? Modestet alarmed. We've lost the starboard launch tubes. They took all the 5th squadron with them. Chariot lurched again. But the second raider was gone now, and their missiles were closing in the last 2, which were now focusing on their own defense, desperately firing everything at the missiles. They barely managed to wipe the salvo out, but unfortunately for them, Chariot's fighters were right behind the missiles. Their lances were lighter, but 40 of them made short work of the modular warship. Status report, James demanded as they blasted past the wreckage of the pirate squadron. Fighter launch tubes are gone. Modestet reported grimly. We have 4 squadrons in space, and that's all we're getting. Most of the missile launches are gone. Arsenal? Ma'am? Please tell me we can go to FTL. Not yet, the engineer said grimly. We're clear enough to begin repairs, at least until their fighters start catching up. James was watching. The space station was starting to spew fighters like a broken gumball machine. Most were Cobras, but there were plenty of freshly built Katanas in the mix. We've got Poseidon, tactical officer announced, relaying to Alliance. All right, Roberts, Terran commander said softly. I know you weren't telling me everything. Show me what you've had up your sleeve. It had better be enough. Poseidon was moving away from the shipyard, heading in pursuit of Chariot. She was newer, bigger, and faster. If the Stellar Fox didn't take her out, James Tuckamish had just doomed his people. Vulture bomber Kodiak Echo Arsenal. Michelle Williams had been aboard the old Avalon when they'd ridden the needle into tranquility to save the day at the start of the war. She had never done it before then, and hadn't done it since until today. A starfighter was about the worst place to be during this kind of fight, with limited air supply and tight spaces that were extremely vulnerable to the warping and twisting inevitable in the process. Theory, and her experiences alike, said that everything would snap back into place once the drive field went down. But that didn't make the actual flight any less painful or terrifying. We have their target coordinates, song announced over her implants, the keening of the air around her, ripping apart, echoing alongside her voice. Hushan is adjusting to bring us in at 1,000,000 clicks and 2,000 kps. This is going to get rough, the CAG said grimly. Hang on. Michelle's personal universe turned inside out, and for several moments all she saw was light, as if flying into the heart of a sun. When the light faded, the pain began, making the previous discomfort seem almost gentle. Even if light was travelling normally to her eyes, which it wasn't, there'd been nothing to see when her bomber inside Kodiak's fighter launch tubes. She hung onto the arms of her pilot's chair with grim determination as her body tried to tear itself apart and reassembled several times a second for what felt like eternity. Then a brick wall slammed into her face. She grabbed a moment's breath, and a tactical feed updated with the surroundings. Launch, 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 echoed into her area. Deck officer slamming into the commands to throw her bombers into space. Even as she processed the Kodiak had overshot her intended emergency point by a full 40 light second. 48 starfighters, half of them vulture bombers, blasted into space barely 700,000 kilometers from Poseidon. The battlecruiser in hot pursuit of Chariot had seeming to miss the new threat for several critical seconds. Echo Wing, Fox free, all for all, Fox free, all. Michelle snapped as the bombers swung clear of Kodiak. She spun the little ship in space, aligning the 4 torpedoes on her launch frameworks with the battlecruiser and triggering the launch sequence. It wasn't a perfectly coordinated launch, but between her bombers and Kodiak itself, over 100 missiles launched towards Poseidon in under 6 seconds. Clean launch. I'm 96, repeat, 96 torpedoes on course. 3 minute, 40 seconds flight time. All right, Williams, the CAG responded. Alpha Wing is launching, Bravo's loading in, and Charlie's prepping. Fall back behind Delta Wing and return to Kodiak to rearm. We're going to need you again before this is done. Yes, ma'am. As they spoke, another set of 48 starfighters blasted into space. With the extra birds from the Alexander, it would take 2 more full launches before all Kodiak's fighters were in space, and it wasn't going to be safe for the bombers to try and land until the launches were complete. Echo Wing, form up on Kodiak and prepare your landing run, she ordered. Keep an eye on your birds, guide them in. We'll stay out until impact. If nothing else, she wanted to watch the enemy blow up with her own eyes. Michelle had fought Terran warships. Poseidon was the 4th Hercules-class battlecruiser she'd gone up against since the war began, and her new crew's reactions were pathetic. Any of the Hercules she'd faced before would have already had their fighters out before Kodiak jumped in system, and would have turned to face the carrier the bombers the moment they arrived. It might not have saved them, though 30 katanas would have made one hell of a dent in torpedoes, but it would still have been competent. Almost 60 seconds elapsed before Poseidon even began to adjust course, turning to bring her heavy positron lances to bear on Kodiak. The carrier's half-megaton a second lances couldn't penetrate the battlecruiser's deflectors at this range. The reverse was not true of Poseidon's 1.5 megaton beams, and the fact that it took over 2 minutes for Poseidon to even start shooting was a damning tale of the conscripts Coty had crewed her with. There should have been starfighters in the launch tube, ready to go the moment there was a threat. There might have been a delay getting the crews from more than the Ready Squadron up and into space, but that Ready Squadron should have deployed at least by the time the cruiser opened fire. Instead, torpedoes were less than a minute from impact when the launch tubes flared, throwing 2 squadrons of katanas into space, far too late to change the cruiser's fate. Beams of positrons flashed past the bombers, reaching out for the carrier that was on their way home, but Hushan demonstrated the difference between a veteran of the vicious war with the Commonwealth and a raw recruit with the practice ease. Again and again, the battlecruiser fired, cycling through all her massive primary beams as she tried to take down the carrier, and again, she missed. Then the crescendo of death crashed down over Poseidon, with dozens of torpedoes surviving desperate attempts by the starfighters and cruiser herself to turn back the tide. Poseidon was a massive, well-built ship. She would have survived 1 direct hit, possibly even 2 or 3, or half a dozen near misses. Over 30 missiles struck home in 5 seconds, and one of Terra's most modern battlecruisers disappeared in a ball of antimatter annihilation. Echo Actual, this is Kodiak Flight Control, a voice said in Michelle's implants as the light from the explosion washed over them. Starfighter launch is complete. We're ready to bring the bombers home. Well done, Commander. It's a good book. Oh, let's see. Go back to questions. Oh, well, before we, you are. That is broadly speaking on time. I think. Let me just check whether the timing is right. Raven's course popped up exactly on time. Before we get into Raven's course, any questions? Let's answer the questions in the chat. Let's go through them. Wayne's World of Science. Did you hear about the cluster orbiting Sag A at 30% light speed? How many of those 7% C velocity can I fit place on the old C 7% C or new 10% C, and can I still have some of the 10% C ones? A mixture. At 7% C, they can build more ships, which is a factor. It is a factor, but do you have the crews for those more ships? That's the thing. You see, you always have the choice of making your ships, individual ships, more powerful, and or making them more numerous. And let's put it this way: if you're talking about weapons which are, let's say, railguns at 7% of C, I would say for destroyers, probably I'd keep them. But if I was talking about my capital ships, I'd go for the 10% of C. Because I want every one of my capital ships, i.e. battle cruisers, if you're talking about Raven's course, on a Raven and Peacekeeper's Soul, to be as powerful as possible. And for carriers, definitely go for the 10% of C, because I want them to be able to hit something as far away as physically possible. And the thing is, 10% of C might not give you more range than 7% of C, but it means you're going to hit the target at that range 50% quicker. Possibly more. In which case, you want it. Because so there is different calculation. Of my destroyers, which I would be in Raven's World, which I'd be building for numbers, I'd probably go with maintaining the gun. It's probably good enough for them. But for capital ships, big ships, I'd be going for something bigger. Take care, Sack. Good luck with your writing. I'll enjoy reading it. I think, honestly, if we're talking about space travel and logistics, I think one of the troubles is that we keep wanting to do things in one jump. For example, and this is not new, there are other people who have the same idea, but if I was talking about setting up a colony on Mars, the first thing I'd be thinking about doing would be setting up a station on the moon or a station on a Martian moon. Pick one, whichever one of the moons is best. And I would divide my ships in construction into three things. I would have a system which provided ships which went from ships which go from Earth to the moon and back, so just do that journey. Ships which travel between the two moons, i.e. between our own moon and the Mars's moon, and ships which go from Mars to their moon. And basically, you probably only need two types of ships, because probably the ship you build for doing Earth to the moon can probably do the same journey. But I think the trouble is, and one of the things I keep looking at, is the problem of building a ship which can do the whole thing. And you sit there and go, why are we trying to? Because honestly, if you don't want to establishing a lunar base, we could get the practice of building a lunar base on our own moon, which is a lot easier because it's nice and close to us relatively in space terms. Then we could use that practice to build a Martian lunar base. Then we have a nice safe place to support the building up supplies, so we can then build up a Martian colony. It would seem far more sensible than to keep going, we're going to launch from Earth and go to Mars. That just doesn't make sense. It sounds good, it sounds cool, but it doesn't make sense as a rule. It just sounds like someone's going for a jump. Yeah, HMAS supply. I think the Australians have a tradition of doing naming supply ships a supply. I'm sure they've done it before, I think, from memory. Have I eaten yet today? I've eaten. I had a nice big breakfast. We'll leave it at that. Thank you for asking, Stafford and Waring. Even the new smaller one is too big for the destroyers. Grab driver. Yeah, in which case, go if you're going for your capital ships, go for the 10% of light speed. Damn, seriously. Maybe not even moon, but near Earth asteroid. The moon's probably easier to build on because we know the orbit. Jack Ray, logistics bases like the city of St. Louis was jump off point for Louis and Clarke Expedition 1804. Logistic bases like, I don't know, when you're talking about the whole scenario of the American Civil War or any war, or basically we can go back to the Romans and the war against Carthage. You know, you build, you don't go the whole route in one go. What you do is you build a base, and what we need is we need a center which we can transition safely from one type of ship to the other type of ship. Moon would seem to be the obvious place to set it up. Azoski, interplanetary doesn't need to consider aerodynamics and heat shielding for the reentry, but needs to consider radiation shielding in short. Yep. Gunter can go a long way with 0.01 g gravities on an ion thruster in deep space. Can't get into orbit in that on that. Mm-hmm. But you could probably get to a lunar orbit on that. Maybe with some assistance from chemical thrusters as well. It'd be perfectly sensible, possible to do things on current technology if we just didn't decide we had to do it all in one go. Right, Raven's Course. Now, Raven's Course has possibly one of the most interesting battles you will ever read in science fiction. And when I say interesting, I mean this because, and please note, on my book, yeah, I did, before it updated, I did have the old one designed for it. So, I'm going to the chapters shift back and forwards between different perspectives, but I'm going to keep to just the ship. Let's start off with chapter 34. So this is after they've been at a. Let me put this in context. They've been at a diplomatic meeting, and one of the factions in the diplomatic meeting decided to turn on everyone else and start blasting away. Mm-hmm. Also, the thing is, if you did, and this is the point I often make about having setting up a base on the moon and then choosing a suitable lunar base in orbit around Mars, is you then have an evacuation point and you don't end up with a scenario like The Martian, i.e., with someone trapped down on Mars and no one can help them for months on end. It's a case of, yes, the planet, the setting up the lunar colony, of course, the lunar station would itself be a risk, but you could build into that when you, with the experience of a colony on the moon, you would probably build in multiple chambers and build it up so you to support. But you're going to be more at risk building on the planet. This way, you would have a withdrawal point for if you had issues, because you'd be going into a completely new scenario again. I've got good news, bad news, and we're frigated news. Song told Henry with Henriksen connected her. When Henriksen connected her, I'm hoping one of those is that I have a gravity shield. Henry replied grimly. Those fighters are going to be in range far more quickly than I like. That's the good news, yes. Song replied. The good news is that we've checked all of the breakers. They're all fine despite the power surge that blew them out, and that means that not only do you have a gravity shield, you're going to keep having a gravity shield. If the switches keep holding up, we're looking at a 30-second reset if they take the shield down again. They can kill us in those 30 seconds, but that's better than I dared hope. What's the rest of the news, Henry admitted. The bad news is that the keel is completely irreparable, his chief engineer told him. She's done, sir. Short of a complete rebuild of the core hull, Raven's main batteries are history. You've got missiles and what's left of the defensive lasers, but that's it. That at least made the age-old game of power balancing much easier, Henry supposed. Without the ability to fire the main guns, or even had more than enough power to run all the systems simultaneously. If that's the bad news, what's the we're frigated news, he asked. I overestimated how much stress the keel could take, Song said quietly. We can't sustain this pace for much longer, and the compensators are in rougher shape than I'd thought to. What do you mean, Henry demanded. If we keep the ship under any kind of subjective thrust for much longer, we're going to snap the keel in half, the engineer told him. And compensators aren't going to hold up against half a KPS squared either. We need to cut to point 3, and we need to do it in the next 10 minutes, sir. Henry was silent for several seconds, studying the geometry. The three Guardians were still pursuing the last Kozan cruiser. Somehow, what he guessed was Callad's flagship was intact as she drove for the ship line to hierarchy space. She'd lost enough acceleration that the pursuit had to be nearly over, but she was still fighting. The Drifter starfighters, on the other hand, had now been chasing Raven for 10 minutes. Almost 40 minutes had passed since the beginning of the fight, and Raven's desperate course had taken almost 2 million kilometers from the original contact point. The fighters were still almost another million kilometers past that, but they were now closing the distance at about almost 3 times Raven's acceleration. How long can we push it, he asked, turning his attention to the broader map. He'd been counting on outrunning the Guardians for the next 2 days. If he suddenly went from having an acceleration advantage to a disadvantage, that was an option. The closer you get to the 10-minute mark, the more likely we are to break the ship in half, sir, Song said bluntly. Right, Henry sighed and adjusted the settings for his virtual bridge. But it's early. Cut acceleration to 0.3 kps squared and confirm with engineering. Lieutenant Colonel Song has to call to our on acceleration now. Sir, we're going to get caught by frigating everyone at that Axel, Henry agreed. I know. Set your course for the contact and Comet Swarm at 60 by 47. Can we 0-0 at them before the Guardians are close enough to pick out our heat from the ice? They're 10 million kilometers away, sir. ETA is 2 hours, 18 minutes. If the Guardians flip now, they'll still be at least 2 million kilometers away when we zero in. We might just make it. We'll have to take out every one of those starfighters. Henry noted. Inerka, you got the new pattern? I've got it. Weapons range in 40 minutes for us. Could a couple more for them. We'll get one up and unopposed salvo in, but they've also got one salvo on board. What about internal weapons? They'll be 1% light speed relative across the point. They're not breaking off easily. Most version fighters are pure missile platforms, I said from the CIC. They'll probably break off vertically, pass around us. They're close enough to pick us up if we try and hide. We have to kill them all. That was easier said than done. 60 starfighters, and he currently didn't even have one. Hopefully we'll have starfighters by then, he murmured. He had faith in Flanagan's people, but at the same time, time was not their friend. So the Guardians, they're breaking off. Oh. Henry turned his attention back to the running battle he wasn't involved in, just in time to see the end. It turned out that it wasn't just the skip line to R175 the drifters had laid laser satellites at. The Kozan cruiser had almost made it, but then dozens of weapons platforms lit up. Ayote had seen the first energy signatures, and now Henry saw them all. The beams weren't full heavy weapons, but they were also firing ranges as short as 50,000 kilometers, and they were almost 100. There was almost 100 of them. The last of Star Voice Khalid's command came apart as beams slashed through a hull, ripping the warship to pieces, and leaving the Guardians clear to come after Raven. That's it then, he murmured. Officers, we are now the only people who can counter whatever story the drifters want to tell about what happened here. Somehow I don't think those starfighters are on their way to save us. It could be, Ayote pointed out. Ayote pointed out, even if the drifters are behind us, they haven't done anything outside their agreements yet. The Kozan fired first. Did they? Henry asked. Then tell me, XO, if you had managed the perfect alpha strike that had destroyed or crippled every enemy in the battle space, would you have just sat there for 90 seconds until the drifters started shooting at you? Gods, Inerka's curse was soft. All they need to do is cut that 90 seconds out of the sensor footage and there'll be no question, will there? It won't even be doctored footage, so almost no analysis would pick it up. Those 90 seconds aren't enough to prove the Kozan's innocence, Henry told us people, but they are enough to create doubt. They're enough that we talk to the Kozan before going to war. And I have the sinking feeling that someone wants us to go to war. Or we are just jumping at shadows because we're afraid of the drifters, Ayote asked. You're stretching, sir. Stretching pretty damn far. Question, I suppose, is also why they aren't talking to us, Henry pointed out. We could wait the extra few minutes to see if they fire first. We also have to consider that Raven is walking wounded at this point. The channel's quiet. It's your call, sir. It's my job to tell you that you're twisting for a chance to say Star Voice for Khalid didn't shoot either at you, but that twist doesn't look wrong either. I know, on all accounts. And he was angry. He was so very angry that Todorich was dead. If he could blame Khalid, well, that would hurt, but his anger was targetless. If Khalid wasn't his fault, then he did have a target, and two women dear to his heart to be angry over. We can risk it. Commander Moon, we will have an attempt to warn off the drifter starfighters. If they do not break off, Commander Inerka, you're to fire as soon as they're in range. We can't give up that shot. It's the only chance we've got to reduce the odds. Drifter Fighter Wing, this is Lieutenant Commander Lauren Moon aboard the United Planet Space Force vessel Raven. Henry was leaving the whole message to Moon. He suspected his version would involve a lot more bloodthirsty threats than hers. With everyone out of the acceleration tanks and back in their seats on the bridge, he could even hear her speaking instead of playing the message back. Raven is withdrawing to a safe skip line and to fall back to friendly territory. While we appreciate drifter intervention against the Kozan attack, we must act to protect our own safety at this point. Any fighter craft entering within 750,000 kilometers of Raven will be fired upon. We are not in need of immediate assistance or escort. Fall back for everyone's safety. The fighters continued on their course, though the light speed delays meant they wouldn't get Moon's message for several seconds. They are moving at well over 1% of light speed relative to the initial battlecraft pace now, accelerating hard to close the distance of Raven. Most starfighters would carry between 5 and 10% of light speed in Delta V. They had the fuel to burn for this, but Henry wished he knew if the drifter fighters carried internal weapons. He wouldn't normally worry about the relatively weak lasers or plasma guns that could be mounted on a starfighter, but today he was going to worry about everything. Harrison, let's bring the shield up, he ordered. That should help scare them off, if anything will. Yes, sir. New icons flickered across his screen. It would be very obvious to the starfighters when the gravity shield came up. His ship would be harder to locate inside the bubble once the shield was up, buying her a small but useful amount of stealth and evasion. He checked on the fighter wing status and grimaced at the icons flashing under the spacecraft. 7 fighters were marked as red offline. The 8th was black, destroyed. There was only one way that had happened. O'Flanagan report, he ordered. I'm sourcing dark allies for meeting the designer, the CAG said flatly. We almost had everything aligned and then one of the emitters broke free and fell. Through the starfighter, Henry finished. through the starfighter at 11 subjective gravities, and knocked a 111 kilogram maintenance robot free in the process. Raven 1 is offline permanently. We've been working on the alignment since we got a cut to compensated acceleration, and it's so going. At least 10 minutes, sir. We'll be nearly in weapons range of Drifter starfighters at that point, Commander. Is that going to be the full wing? No, I'm only going to have 5 pilots, sir. If I'm down to 7 fighters, and we only are going to have 2 Lancers ready for this, with the GMS and the gravity shield, I'll back them against 60 Drifter ties. Henry swallowed his reactions. He hated that particular nickname for an unshielded fighter. We don't know enough about the Drifters fighters for me to want to make that take that bet, Flanagan pointed out. I didn't say I wanted to take it, sir, but what choice do we have? I'll scramble as soon as I have planes. If we're only a little lucky, we still have a battlecruiser for you to scramble from, Henry admitted. Now, this goes on, and basically, I have to admit, the interesting thing about this particular and particularly interesting book is that it involves a lot of hiding inside inside a comet cloud, and how you would hide in the various asteroids and the reality of what the things would be if you were hiding inside them. It's worthwhile reading from that perspective to think about it, because we think of space as this big open thing. We often think of the sea as this big open thing. The lesson of the Falklands War is that it's not. To quote Michael Clarke, rock beats Exocet. That was it. That was his entire reason for picking San Carlos Bay. That was his entire reason for doing all that, was if you were doing an amphibious assault, you get in close. And if you consider all the current plans you have and you hear talking about when we're talking about amphibious operations today, we're always talking about doing them from further away from shore. Because that gives air defense missiles the best chance of intercepting. But if you think about it, Exocets rely on the same philosophy as hypersonics. And hypersonics do not do well with pop-up maneuvers. So again, it comes back to rock beats missile. Interesting thing for everyone to think about. In this scenario, they end up hiding, setting up explosives, setting up systems as traps within the field that actually do damage the other pursuing ships and buy them time. Very good on finding the timeout button, Glyn and Safford. Yeah, it is a dirty move to blast their ships underground. But the thing is, they use shuttles, they use all sorts of things to hide around, and it's a whole interesting scenario of basically guerrilla warfare in space. That was actually where I used it for recently, when I was doing a talk with some people to talk about strategy and thinking and approach to warfare, and giving them a sort of discussion. And I took them through, and the battle goes on, and I gave them all a couple of chapters of about 4 chapters of Raven Scores, and they read it through. And the point is, when they were reading it through, they were going, oh. Because they started off with going, this is a book about this. It's about space fighting. There's going to be no guerrilla warfare deception in here. Oh, there is. Oh. Because the trouble is, when you are thinking about warfare on the Earth, you tend to think in either moving in a sort of this plane or moving in this plane. This one is applicable to submarines and aircraft. This one is applicable to pretty much everything. But if you're fighting in space, everything. Everything can do everything. It can go up, down, sideways, all over the place. But it's the combat power of a warship. This is why I often say if I was going to pick the first people to man the first spaceships, if we were building warships for fighting in space, I'd go to submarine crews. Because they think in up and down as well as side to side and all that, but they also are used to living for months on end in an enclosed environment. Which is my main problem with Stargate. But we'll leave that to one side. They certainly do have a full roster of patrol ships today. They have more than even normal. Oh, right. So, I did schedule, I think, this time for questions and answers and Q&A sessions. So, basically, please, questions, answers. Questions, and I will endeavour to give answers. And so I did 5 books today. And they're all Glyn Stewart's, and you can find them on Kindle, you can find them on Amazon. I haven't put links down below because everyone has their own different version of e-reader they like to go and use. You can also find his own website. I enjoy the books, and I enjoy them because they're well written. I have got other books by other authors on here, and quite a lot of them. I have to say, I don't. This is going to sound, people are going to be very surprised by this, but I don't tend to use 40k books for teaching. I can't think why, but other authors I've used for science fiction in terms of teaching. Jay and Cheney, Terry Mixon. I've used both of them. Fred Hughes occasionally. Joshua Dazelle. Yeah. Pretty good. And I had to say the one I used to really like was Raymond Wheel. And unfortunately, he's the gentleman who died, as I understand it. And basically, his books have had to be finished off by mostly by his wife, who's done a very good job from his notes. But, you know, that's the thing. Let's see. The torpedoes hit the forward section. 2 torpedoes hit the forward, 1 hit aft. It's her position. As I've been over with Taranto again, and I will go over Taranto a lot Probably for the rest of my life, I will be saying this. Whoever placed Gilio Cesare really loved that ship, because that's honestly the only one that you cannot hit with torpedoes at all, no matter what you do. It's just it's just seriously. You know, I have done this several times, and the Giulio you can hit and keep on hitting. Littorio is incredibly exposed. The Cavour is pretty exposed. The Doria you can get to, and the Vittorio Veneto you can get to. The Cesare, no matter what angle you come at, is frigging impossible to get to. Basically, the only real angle you could sort of approach her from is from the landward side. Basically coming at her from an angle of the southeast. But even that's going to pass over so many air defenses, you're going to end up getting wiped out. So anyway, instead of the standard class America builds them to be ours, what is the direction of Western world? If America builds them to be ours instead of standards, then they're not getting the Washington Treaty through, because the rest of the world is going to be building ships to match that. As I've said before on the Dreadnought race, the fact is there was maybe a numbers race between Germany and the UK, but the real Dreadnought race, the tech race, was between Italy, America, and the UK, with Japan as an also member. And frankly, that's a tech race going on. And hope you enjoyed it, Glenn. My main problem with Stargate is basically is that they go with they just keep to an Air Force personnel structure, and I would sit and then they bring in Marines for some reason, but they don't bring in the rest of the services, and you sit there and go, well, actually, you would. Well, you'd be talking about the Air Force would probably be still providing the pilots, but then when you're talking about crewing that ship space, you would probably be talking a lot of naval personnel being brought up, because let's be honest, they don't. Managing an engine room and keeping that sort of system going, and the watches and etc., that's ship skills. That's ship duties. That's not what you do in a fighter plane. And the fact is, the Air Force doesn't maintain that many multi-crew bombers. And once you're talking about that sort of level of personnel, managing that number of people deployed, the logistics and facilities for it, it's a ship job. It is really a ship job. We teach better than that. 40k doesn't have good strategy. 40k just has it turns up and works. Mix and I worked together on a series that was even more pulpy than the usual for us. It was an interesting series. I've read it. Yeah, great. They needed Maverick in Top Gun 2 to hit Gilio Cesare. Needed something. Nice agreement. If the RM's Littorio, if Adrian Littorio's number 1 and number 2 15-inch magazine buffer, is that enough to break the ship's back? That would sink destroy the ship. It wouldn't. Nice way. If the 15-inch magazines, either one of them goes up, there is nothing left of that ship. The sheer amount of explosive power in those magazines, if they explode, that ship's gone. Doesn't matter if it breaks the back, there just won't be anything left of the ship to build from. Would dive bombing have been possible at Toronto if the Iron had the deck space to bring them on? Would they have used skewers or swordfish? Swordfish, I'm not sure. Swordfish can do dive bombing, but I would actually prefer skewers for dive bombing. So basically, this is one of those scenarios. If you did Toronto and you had Ark Royal along, she might have had some skewers aboard her, and that could have made a difference. But that's the only dive bombing, and that's the only option. Where I see where Gilead Cesare really gets. And even then, Gilead Cesare probably doesn't get hit because, let's be honest, if you've got to pick your targets between all the battleships the Rage of Marina has in that harbour, Gilead Cesare is probably one of the ones down the bottom of the list. It's difficult to get to, and it's not one of the more valuable units. Nice again. Why doesn't the Type 23 frigate have a CIO system like 20mm Phalanx or 30mm Goalkeeper? Because, frankly, the sensible point to put them in, install them would have been after, a Falklands War, but they decided to rely on Seawolf in VLS systems instead. And now it's reached the point where it's not going to get installed, and nothing's going to get installed. But interesting enough, the Type 31s, Type 26s, and rubber ships do. Right. I'll be back in a second. I just heard a noise outside my door, and I want to go check if it's Foxy. Or rather, the feral research assistant. I think it was her. I think it was her. I wasn't 100% sure, but I think it was her because she stopped and looked back. Dan, you're the doctor. You're the medical doctor here, so if you're saying it, that one's it. It could quite possibly be. Con Cameron's Doc. If you could go to any dockyard at any point in history and examine it, but not see the ship, which would it be and why? Camel Laird's in 1918, probably. Fly Me Closer, I Want to Hit It With My Sword pretty much sums up the Vigilante series. It was a good series for that. Matthew, can you imagine SBD Dauntless with Bristol Hercules engine and a TBD Devastator with a Bristol Centaurus engine? Well, I can, but I'm not really sure what's the point. Because remember, these aircraft are as much products of their engines as they are their designs. So they'd be built with that around their engines. In fact, 1920s and 1950s, the SBD Dauntless and the TBD Devastator would be incredibly different if they were built around Centaurus and Hercules engines. They just wouldn't be the same. So, have you got Drac back for leaving out of HMS Africa yet? No, a video yet? No, I haven't got him back. I wholeheartedly support him drinking as much iron brew as he can. I have complete faith that his iron brew supply is fine and untainted and not having any secrets in it. Sci-fi section, and Dr. Clarke says, "I'll be back in a second." Well, you know, I had to go with some with the classics. So anyway, what is the worst Naval Legacy you've ever seen in a movie? Maybe worst historical accuracy. Let's put it this way. I have my regular problem of any medieval movie where everyone seems to have a sword, when swords were just not that common. When it comes to naval movies, there is the joyously self-reproducing Yamatos in some episodes of Midways. There is a joyously, there are times when you're obviously dealing with scenario that's not the case, but there are some Age of Sail, especially set at movies, which frankly, they go heavily on rum, sodomy, and a lash idea of naval discipline and naval life in that period, and honestly, that misses the reality of it. Because the reality of any naval period is that you cannot govern a ship like that. You can for a short time, maybe get away with it, but there will be a mutiny, and you will be in trouble. The reality is you have a very few officers and on a board a ship. You cannot keep a crew of, and let's be honest, sailors have to be very skilled at their jobs, going just through threats of violence and use of force against them. You just can't do it. There are too many of them, too few of you. And they're armed. And they know where other arms are. And it's not a good scenario for you as an officer. So you don't do it. But the amount of movies where it's just, that's the common occurrence, and you just go, oh God, not this again. Did you happen to read the Rosie article, Return of Industrial Warfare? I get sent a lot of Rosie articles. Sometimes I look at their titles and I just go, well, did it ever go away? The trouble is, and I love Rosie, but they are in many ways, how do I put this nicely and honestly? Look, Rosie as a whole do, to an extent with their articles, follow the funding. And they do provide some very good history and some very good analysis. But in my experience, rarely does it, in terms of a large volume, go against the mass perspective and the accepted perspective. And the thing is, there was this idea that industrial warfare went away with the end of the Cold War. Well, for starters, there are people like me who've been saying, what, the Cold War ended? Really? Or was it just a kind of peace where every side is rapidly rearming and reconfiguring? Oh, and one side's actually disarming because it believes it's won. The whole point about a Cold War is you can't really win or lose it because it never happens. One side suffers a major setback, but that doesn't mean the war's over. Because if we consider in the real war, Britain lost France in 1940. They lost Norway. These are massive setbacks. And yet it keeps fighting. And for a while, Britain and the Commonwealth and a few allies are, with occasional support from America, but slowly building support, but occasional support of America, often at the price, are fighting fighting on. And eventually other allies come involved and the war gets won. But the point is, the war wasn't over just because they suffered a major setback. And that's the problem with the end of the Cold War. One side suffers a major setback, and there's a realignment of powers and alliances and memberships. But that doesn't mean the war was over. But it was taken as the war being over. Basically, people wanted to have a victory lap. They had it. And with that, they started declaring things like industrial warfare and all this are over. But why was industrial warfare ever going to be over? Because if you're talking about any war between any industrialized nation, it's going to be industrial. And there was, of course, the idea, oh, it's all going to be cyber. Well, that's lovely, but how do I protect my systems basically and fundamentally from cyber attack? I disconnect them from the internet. Okay, so now you're talking about media warfare and information warfare and weaponizing information. Well, as China and other nations show, you can actually control access to the internet for your public. Okay, it's going to have holes, but the vast majority you can successfully achieve control for the vast majority of the team of the people the majority of the time. So again, comes back to when was industrial warfare over? There's a return of it, but it never went away. And that's exactly for one. If Littorio explodes from two 15-inch magazines blowing up, is there anything the Italians could salvage? No. And let's be honest, if the Littorio blows up from both its 15-inch magazines going boom, the resulting wave and destructive power probably causes masses of damage to Cesare, Vittorio Veneto, and ultimately probably to Gosia, Zara, and Fiume. In fact, and Giulio. It could seriously swamp things. Let's put it this way. So, she carried there's a dispute over whether she carried 487 rounds per gun or... Oof. Let's put it this way. If we consider the likelihood and the likely scenario of the firepower she's carrying, let's see, armament. Well, the high explosive shells weighed roughly 3/4 of a ton. The armor-piercing shells weigh in at roughly 0.8 of a ton. They usually carry them. And... How many are they carrying? Roughly, well, let's be honest, it's roughly... That's not far off 700 shells per gun. Although there's another one here which is saying 500 shells per gun. So let's go with 500 shells per gun. And let's consider mostly that you're talking somewhere in the region of 2.5 kilotons of explosive going off. If those go off, yeah, there's not going to be anything left. Mr. Aliens invade using a base on Mars. How do you build a space warship with current tech? Ooh. If you're going to ask me that question, if I'm going to build a space warship with current tech, I'm going to have to try and get railguns working. And I'm probably going to have to build something a nuclear power plant. And it's basically going to be a Zumwalt as planned in space. And probably scaled up missiles. Basically, I'm going to go to the Russian size of a scale of a missile, but using Western tech. So all the things in it are a lot smaller, so that they can take up more space for explosive power and missile. Well, actually, no, probably just put a nuclear bomb in there, put a nuclear warhead in the missile, and add a lot more fuel. Railguns and missiles are my best options with nuclear warheads. Dr. C. On the subject of rail and aircraft and engines, you only need to look at how bad the Bullfighter was with Merlins. Listen, if the RM got a British SBD Dauntless and TBD does like aircraft with air engines, I said earlier, and what does it kill off the Ferry Albacore? And what other changes happen as those get those planes? Okay, nice to go for one. Look, if you're building those would not be the Dauntless and the Devastator with those engines, because they'd be very different aircraft to accommodate those engines than the ones they built around. But leaving that to one side, if you've got other aircraft which can do the role, then you probably aren't going to use the Fairy Albacore for it, because anything is better than the Fairy Albacore. The Swordfish almost killed off the Albacore, and the Swordfish was the Albacore's predecessor. So anything with any remotely improvement would probably kill off the Albacore. Because the Albacore was basically supposed to be the interim thing to basically provide something which is in a slight improvement over the Swordfish to keep them going until the Barracuda came in. And unfortunately, the Barracuda didn't come in quick enough, and the Albacore actually was in service for a while, and it just wasn't as good as in terms of reliability. As they said, bring back, as the song goes, oh, bring back my Peggy to me. There's an entire hymn that the Fleet Air Arm pilots and observers come up with, which basically is an ode to the reliable engine of the Swordfish versus the one of the Albacore. Although anything with a Taurus engine is probably not going to be that reliable. Doc Cameron, do you write notes in the margins of books you get sent to review? No. Mainly because my dyslexia/dysgraphia means my handwriting is absolutely atrocious, even worse than people's with the doctor title normally is, and so therefore my handwriting would be ineligible even to me. On Drax's live stream last night, I asked if you could elaborate on why it's not a fair assessment that seems that the Russian Navy are suffering a hood moment. How nice to everyone has been taken out by the Belgrano effect as being completely disappeared. An entire Navy sidelined by 200 ship missiles. So could you do that, please? Well, the Russian Navy hasn't been completely sidelined. They're still operating. Yes, they've suffered a loss, but they're still operating. The Navy's still out there, still doing its role. Yes, they're not as successfully projecting power as they were, and yes, they've suffered reverses, but they're still out there doing their job. The reality is there are limits to what a navy can do. The vessel involved was not whilst whatever it's billed as, it certainly wasn't as at a level it should have been. And the difference is that for the Royal Navy, losing Hood led to vengeance, but it was never really a massive loss for them. The thing is, in the Black Sea, they've lost something big, but they're still operating, so it's not a Belgrano moment. It's more of a, what's it? You lose a key asset, but you still keep operating. That's interesting. Royal Navy always keep operating, but that was just one of many key assets, and that's the trouble. There wasn't really a replacement asset like this available. So this is why people keep assuming it's like the Belgrano. But there again, it's not like the Belgrano because the Argentinians literally go home after that point. I would say, actually, because interesting enough, it's kind of like Taranto, because the Italians lose, taken off the board. I know they're not sunk, but they lose Taranto itself as a major operating base, which is a big loss for them, and an image loss, and they have a number of ships damaged. But they're still out at sea operating. So it's a loss. It's something which they're going to have to rebuild from, but it's not something which is devastating for them in actual operational capability. So it's closer to the effect on Taranto, on the Reggio Marina, than it is any of the other two options, which are often muted. But that's because often people don't really get the real point of Taranto. They either think it's a massive victory wherein the Italian Navy never comes back to sea again, in which case they compare it to the Belgrano, or they think it was a minor hit which they shrugged off. And the reality is it's in between. So, like if the 36-hour watch some captain put Hornblower on, was that realistic punishment or just brutal? That's just brutal. And putting an officer on a 36-hour watch is just absurd. You wouldn't do that. It's going to sound strange. If you did that to someone, then they're not going to be useful for you. And that's a bad use of resources. If a captain did that, and actually did that, then the odds were there would be a note written. Because you have to remember, captains, it's not just them who responds to the Admiralty and sends back reports. The first lieutenant will send a report back to the Admiralty. Other officers might do it. There's going to be the Admiral Secretary. So there's going to be various, the master, the ship's master, navigator, etc., will send back reports and send reports. These things also have to be documented down in the books. They have to put down punishments, have to be logged in the books. Otherwise, if they don't log them properly, they're illegal. And if that gets back to the Admiralty, you are no longer a captain. So it's kind of an issue. Stafford Thompson, how many red newspapers were written during the Napoleonic War about redcoats doing unspeakable things to the Irish in order to sow discontent within the ranks again? Media as a weapon is not new. No. Or though, in those times we called them pamphlets. But yeah. Bonus, considering the large cost of smart weapons and their slow replacement speed, do you think there'll be a resurrection of dumb weapons such as 40mm chain gun and 5 to 6 inch main guns? I honestly am sitting there with people going, I think the first battles and the first 2 weeks of a war any future war will be fought with missiles. I think the next 6 months of it will not be. But that's a bilge pumps discussion. We've had that a lot on bilge pumps. Nice. What the frigating the two magazines of Littorio could cause a tsunami? Not a large one, but yeah, they would cause a massive wave. It probably wouldn't swamp the town, but for the ships in the sea, it would be dangerous. How high or far would the 15-inch gun houses go? I'd have to look it up. Turret toss competition. I am not quite sure how high the 15-inch guns would go, but it would be quite a lot. No. Senator, if the US builds the treaty standards as South Carolina's 1930s treaty ships, what would the reaction will be? They would be building to match, if not exceed. The nicest way the British would build the G3s. Or rather, considering when the standards start construction, that's what triggers, to extent the Queen Elizabeth, etc. Expect the Queen Elizabeth to be more powerful. If the US Navy is building a 16-inch gun ship, and let's be honest, the South Carolina class yeah. If they're building the 1930s South Carolina class, Wyoming's New York class, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Mexico, Tennessee, 1930s ones, Colorado's. I think you mean the North Carolina class and etc., not South Carolina's in the 1930s. Sorry, that my brain didn't even catch that. That's their 9 16-inch guns, in which case the Royal Navy would probably be building the Queen Elizabeth class. If they're building something with 9 16-inch guns and the ability to do 28 knots and displacing 30, nearly 45,000 tons fully loaded, don't expect the British to be building anything less. In fact, probably the British will be trying to build something with more. So the British will probably be trying to respond with either something with 12 16-inch guns or maybe 12 15-inch guns, as they already would be developing those. But yeah, it would have to be more and bigger. And the Germans would just be the Germans would just have to give up the ghost at that point because there's no way they could match that one. The Italians and Japanese would respond, and then we would have a whole new arms race going on. Basically, if you launch the South Carolinas instead of the standards, you are changing the world and redrawing the maps. That's sure. Funny, that's what they put on BC 304s. Amazing. So the reason I put on nukes is your thing. I can understand what you're thinking in terms of nukes, but honestly, we just don't have conventional explosives to match. And the nuke warhead I would design would be some sort of armor penetrator, so it would go off inside the ship. That'd be the aim. Well, let's put it this way. Me and Drac would be okay because we're far enough inland and high enough up. But there are lots of people who would be very, very wet if the vessel in the Thames decided to go boom. I don't know. So how would Toronto be remembered if it ended with Victoria blowing up? Uh, Far more massive damage, and for the Rage of Marina, that would be far more dramatic. Don't know. Let's see. Is there an easy way to convert shell sizes from weight to diameter, e.g., 2 pounders or 6 pounders? 2 pounders are usually 40 millimeters. 6 pounders are 57 millimeters, aren't they? Yeah, 6 pounders are 57 millimeters. Um, Easy way to work it out is it's just what I've learned off by heart, honestly. Comments: weight versus diameter. Not since we have dramatically different weight of otherwise equal diameter guns. 120 millimeter Bofors shell, CC 26 kilogram. 120 millimeter smoothbore shell, 16 kilogram. It is interesting, but usually, as a rule of thumb, in naval terms, 12 pounder is 76 millimeter, 6 pounder, etc. Thank you, Tanith. 57 millimeter and 2 pounder, 40 millimeter. Usually, the 2 pounder, the 6 pounder one gets people most confused because they're going, hang on, yeah. It doubles when it goes up another inch. But it sort of that's 3 inch. 2 pounder is less than 2 inches. 57 millimeter is just over, well, over 2 inches. Hmm. I don't know. Did the Italians realize how lucky they got? I'm sure they realized how lucky they got. But the people who realized that were probably realizing it afterwards. During the time, they were just happy, and I wouldn't also be surprised if part of the effect of things was the flooding that they were did. No, so why was the Vittorio Veneto class helicopter cruiser not equipped with sonar? Because if your helicopter cruiser is actually hunting with sonar itself, you've got a problem. You do not. The helicopter cruiser's purpose is to supply a lot of helicopters for the ASW operation, not to go hunting the submarines itself. The whole point of having the helicopters is you keep back, command, and coordinate the anti-submarine warfare operation, and let your frigates, which are cheaper and cheaper, go forward to engage the submarines along with the helicopters. You do not have sonar yourself because then you might be tempted to frick it and use it. That's usually often the reason for these things. Right. You have a lucky 30. I thought you have been a member for 14 months, Jack Ray. It is saying 30 months, but yeah. Yeah, this was the book, of course, we started off with this evening, Remenant Faction, and it's got a lot of good battles in it. The battle, which I have to say is probably the best, is the one at the end of the book. And I'm not going to give it away while reading that, but yeah, you would find that was really good. Hmm. So, any more questions? Have you enjoyed these ones? I know it's a little different from Bruships to traditionally is. Gifted $5. Thank you. I have no idea what that means, but yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I was like, what's this button? That's slightly worrying, but enjoy having the button, and that will probably mean I can build some more emojis. Oh, I thought lost to Kiev. Oh, good lord. Off my head. There's a few thousand. Goodness gracious me. They had, I think it's somewhere in the region of. Okay. 500 destroyed and about 1,000 damaged from memory. But the thing was, they had well over 500,000 captured, which was the bit of people, if I remember correctly. So that's that's even more so. That it's just the numbers in some of the campaigns in the East are just obscene. When you realize that Hitler and Stalin are throwing millions into battles, it just goes, oh my lord. But I'm probably off by figures considering that's from memory. Nothing. The British getting the Bristol Centaurus in the engine by 1959, engine comparable to US Art, would sound half doable. Well, if they got it, that's lovely, but it would require a lot of investment and a lot of luck. Basically, if everything had gone right in Bristol's development, it would have been good and a service. And if it had been, then you have probably something very different turn up in terms of British naval aviation. Especially if you get it by 1939, so January 1939, the aircraft would have been produced in service. There would have been a Swordfish successor coming into service in 1940. Because once you have the engine, building the airframe around it is not that difficult. And thank you, Colin Cameron, for becoming a supporter as well. Senator, what could the US build in 1960 race? Zumwalt's railguns, Fort class car. Honestly, there is theoretically what the US could build to stop the naval race in the 1910s if they could actually build the Iowa class, because they'd just be so massive compared to everyone else's construction at that point. Then it'd be a case of, oh my lord, what do we do to build it? But it would pause it. It wouldn't stop it. It might knock the Germans out of it, but it wouldn't knock the British out of it. The British would start building again. There is nothing you can really build in the scenario that if you have the technology to build it, that the British will not try and respond to in the 1910s because the mindset they're in. Remember, this is a nation where there's a popular upheaval in terms of the public of we want 8 and we won't wait for battleships. If you've got that kind of popular support for your shipbuilding program, you aren't going to give in anytime soon in a naval race. Navies, listen, you get that level of popular support, you're going to have a lot of good funding time. Currently, the reason in the UK that the defence budget is not being touched is quite possibly due to the fact that the only minister in the UK who actually seems to be popular, and only person in the British government who seems to be popular, to the extent that I almost wonder if Keir Starmer's next announcement, this is the Labour leader, will be that he will, even if he gets elected, he will leave Ben Wallace in post as Defence Secretary because he's doing such a good job. Is Ben Wallace. Which is also why I do not predict any sensible person, if they are any sensible people, will go and try and attack the defence budget at the moment. Just not a good option politically for anyone. If you could get long tanners with 18-inch guns, that'd be interesting, but the British will probably respond with something with 18-inch guns as well. Oh, I think there's a difference in the Battle of Kiev when you're talking about 1941 versus 1943. And the fact is, the 1943 offensive, they lost a huge number more, if I remember correctly. It always depends on when you're looking at and also what you're exactly including. So there are times when you have figures given, and I say this myself when I'm dealing with some of the naval figures, because you have to be very careful about what figures you're actually using. Are you talking about the Battle of Kiev, or are you talking about the wider offensive you're losing in the wider area? Because it all depends on how you evaluate the areas and draw your geography. Decorations. The pre-Soviet war tank armies were 14 to 1 in tanks to men. They weren't. Their official figures were 14 to 1 in tanks to men. They really weren't in reality. They didn't have as many tanks as they sometimes like to claim. There was a lot of over-reporting of tank production. People like to think that how do I put this? Less than accurate reporting of the strength of formations is something new in Russia. It's not. It's been around for a long time. They didn't lose 20. Nah. They didn't lose 21,000 in the Battle of Kiev. They lost 21,000 in the defense, possibly. But I doubt they did lose 21,000 because I doubt they had 21,000 tanks to lose in that scenario. It's going to sound strange, but again, yes, lots of people are talking about the BT and the series and similar light tanks and all these sort of things as being perhaps filling in the numbers. But no, the Soviets did not have a magic tank production facility that was churning out all these tanks. It's one of the interesting things is when you put together the figures of actual production versus the figures. It's like with the T-34s. The number of tanks produced, they claim, includes a whole load of tanks which are sent back after damage and are fixed up by the factory, and then they're added to the production numbers. And you go, meh? So you can lose a tank 2 or 3 times. Did you have 3 tanks, or was that just 1 tank? Nice. How limited was the modernization options for the Argentine? They're not the battleships. Basically, you have to send them somewhere else to get them modernized. So it's limited by whatever by what's prepared, by a nation which is prepared to modernize them. There's very little facilities in Argentina that modernize them themselves. Thank you, Tanaverka. Government, was that not done at one point? I mean, it was kept on because he was doing such a good job, even when the government switched. I'm reading it somewhere. Not in recent memory. Take care, Glenn. Have fun. So, no, the German foreign minister in the interwar years was in power, I think, in 4 governments of different leanings. Hmm. So, it's a case of there are these things in history, and it's a good phrase: lies, damn lies, and statistics. Always be careful of numbers. Always be careful of statistics, because people like to say the numbers don't lie. Well, you could present the numbers in a lot of different ways, so they can sure as well facilitate a different argument, depending on your perspective on how you persuade the numbers and what numbers you pick out. It's only when you get down to the really raw data, and you have to trust. Do you trust? The question is, how much do you trust the person interpreting it? And even I don't even trust myself 100%. I always remember the line, and I've seen it now a lot of times where it's between, because I haven't actually I watched the episode, but I've seen the line repeated on the internet as a sort of meme quite a lot. In that, where the guy who I think is Master of Whispers or something, Varys, in Game of Thrones, says to Tyrion, is talking with Tyrion, and Varys says, "I don't. You might not even trust me." And Tyrion goes, "You don't even might not even completely trust me." And Tyrion goes, "I don't even completely trust myself." Well, I don't even completely trust myself. Whenever I'm looking at figures and stats, I always have to check for my own bias, because my own bias will be there. And that's the point. You, as a historian, you always have bias. That anyone who turns around and goes, "I look at this data without any bias," I go, "Really? I have bias." My bias, whenever, and I counter this whenever I'm reading and writing, is always is usually an assumption of what kind of level of reader I'm dealing with, and it comes through my writing. And I will all. This has caused me trouble in my journal writing, but I think it helps in my book writing. In that I do not presume my reader has. It's going to sound strange. I will explain the basic terminology as I will explain everything as I go, because I don't presume I have a reader with previous knowledge of the subject. And that is a form of bias, because that means I will give time and weight things and examples and events and history and stories, the history, to things which will allow me to explain in that way, rather than necessarily go to events which will not support that explanation. So when I'm giving in, so the bias, it creeps in the selection of the examples I choose, because I choose the ones which allow me to explain in a certain way, which will then, if you're reading those books, will see like those are the only important events which happen. And I might not give as much notice to our discussion to other events which don't allow me to explain it as well. And that's a bias. And you have to sort of go, right, and can I find actually a better way of explaining those events? Can I think this through? That's it. When would you put a 20-inch coastal gun battery? Ooh, where wouldn't I? That's it. Would you change history to the fleet arm does not get taken over by RF, as it hurts the RN long term? That would I would certainly. It's going to sound strange. I would keep the carrier aircraft definitely as part of the Navy. So it was one command. I'm not sure what it does long term, but I think ultimately it would change things. Would change a lot of things. Sounds fun, Bijan. Right. Hang on. I think I'm going to have to add another one of these. Yeah. Right. I am going to say last questions. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Hope you found it interesting. And I am going to basically answer all the last questions. And then I'm going to go because I'm basically going to give this 3.5 hours. And then I'm going to go help out and make sure all the fluffies get off the bed and get some food because I haven't had any dinner. I had breakfast, a big breakfast, but I haven't had any dinner. Nathan, do we know when the 3 illustrious were intended to render services to Churchill hadn't held them up? Yeah. Basically do a timeline of almost of the interest illustrious and copy that for the others, and you find out exactly when they're supposed to turn up. I think I did produce an Excel spreadsheet at some point, which actually showed their timeline. Have I got it? Let's see if I can open my Excel spreadsheet. I think I've answered the question, and I take that I would. It would be sensible to. More workbooks. Yeah, bed plan. One entitled Cruiser Mouse. Oh, I know what that's from. Yeah, that's about right. I just got my lovely Excel spreadsheet up, and you're about right. Yeah, Dan, that's about it. So yeah, policy, not a question, but a remark for discussion about next year. Having videos explaining technology with that in the title might make it easier to find them. Yeah, there will be there will be some titles about that. You guy, hello, hey Doxy. How feasible would it have been for the Allies to use turbo concrete water breakers for D-Day as gun platforms? Some of them were. Some of the concrete platforms did have AA guns, etc. mounted on them. I'm not sure using them as big guns because there's a limit to their utility, but they were certainly used for AA guns. Thank you, Dick Richards. Thank you, Carl Gasberg. Thank you, Matthias Slavic. Thank you, Stafford. Thank you, Paul Innes. Thank you, Jack Ray. Illustrious 27th of April, roughly. Middle, 17th of June. Victorious, 4th of May, 1940. And Nominal, potentially 10th of November, 1940. Yeah, potentially. That's about right. That's a fun one, Colin Cameron, to mine the channel. If French invasion at the moment, I would definitely not worry about it. Dan Freeman, no carrier pause is a common feature of timelines, I think. Yeah. It would change things. And also, if you think about it, if you have those yards, those carriers completed, then you have the yard space to build more ships afterwards. So that probably speeds up Implacable and Indefatigable. And, well, definitely speeds them up. And then speeds up probably the Audacious is coming into service. Maybe the Light Fleet carriers coming into service and Unicorn coming into service, and it's all sort of interesting. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, everyone. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Stafford. Thank you, Guy. Thank you, Night Coach 1. Thank you, George. Thank you, Bichon, DG40, Jack Ray, Melanie. Thank you, Sia McDevitt. Thank you, Glyn, of course, this evening. Thank you, Stafford. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, all my admins. Thank you to that, including the two who just randomly got it. Thank you, Tanif. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed, and thank you for watching. Take care, everyone. Thank you. Take care. Go on, Night 6831. What's the question? And I will, while I'm waiting for to see if he responds, I will say, thank you for all your support. I really couldn't do all this without you, so thank you. It just wouldn't happen. Without the members, without the patrons. Ooh, patron vote will go live tomorrow. So there are things that are options. If you wanna go put on some options, go put them on now. For November. No, and also the dates in November are going to change around a little bit because the weeks of research have moved. If the Iron is free, illustrious, and indomitable by the end of 940, how does this affect the war? Let's put it this way. If you have that group in by the end of 1940, then the odds are for Taranto you do not have a single carrier, you have a multi-carrier operation. In that you probably have 2 armored carriers involved in it. With not consequential knock-on impact on Italian operations. With that many extra carriers in the service, then the odds are you do have a carrier eventually available for Force Z. Because if you consider it, this is before Ark Royal is sunk, but is after Courageous and Glorious are lost, so those losses are made up for a lot quicker. So yes, you have to supply those aircraft a lot quicker. It's going to have an impact. In 1940 alone, it would have an impact on Taranto. In 1941, it would probably have an impact on 4C. Because you'd have that much of a bigger pool of carriers to draw from. And especially because in nicest way, if you have no carrier pause, then you might well have Implacable and Indefatigable. You might well have one of them in service by the end of 1941, if not earlier. You might even have both of them in service in 1941. You certainly have Unicorn in as well. And that's just going to change the reality of what you're dealing with. You're going to have a lot more carriers available. Will it have an effect on the Atlantic operations? It might do. It's certainly going to have an effect on, well, let's put it this way. If Bismarck goes out hunting, the odds are you do not have a carrier and a capital ship and two capital ships off on their own. You probably have multiple carriers, so you probably have a carrier with each of those task groups. You also have the scenario that if you've done more damage to the Italians, let's be honest, if you double the aircraft attacking at Taranto, the odds are a lot more Italian ships do not take a lot longer to get back into service, which is going to have a knock-on, a consequential effect in the Mediterranean, because it's going to have an impact on Crete, it's going to have an impact on the evacuation of Greece, it's going to have all that sort of impact. So it's going to have a massive impact the whole way around. Anyway. How much longer will they have survived past 4C? Well, that's the thing. If you have a carrier, as we've been over with 4C, they are attacked by long-range torpedo bombs from land, which aren't escorted by fighters. So if you have fighters to disrupt the attacks, and you have and you have radar, you probably call in land-based fighters to come and assist, but also you have your own fighters to break up the attacks initially and break up the strikes coming in. Okay, so 4C survives. Then you probably have ABDA command form up around 4Z. So all the cruisers, all the destroyers, everything will probably form up around those. What are the Japanese going to respond with? Well, you cannot respond with a small force to that. You cannot send cruisers and rely on them engaging. You know, it's a cruiser force which destroys the ABDA cruiser command. But if you've got Prince of Wales and Repulse, and probably whatever else is sent out to assist them, there's a difference. You know, this is the scenario you're dealing with. You're dealing with a far larger force can be sent, which is going to require far larger force from the Japanese. This might end up turning into a scenario where the Japanese are preparing a major force to go down there, in which case the Americans might surge their own carriers there, combine with the British, and who knows what happens next. This is what you're dealing with once you start to get into this kind of what-if scenario. Because once you have more assets available, you can do more. You fight wars with what you have, or rather, you fight wars with what is available of what you have. If you have more in the first place, the odds are you will have more available. If you have more available, you can do more things. If you can do more things, you might well wear down your opponent more quickly. It's all a big build-up. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone. I hope that answered your question at 661, and take care. Bye. And actually, before I go, I will also add this. That's a big thing to look at when you're looking into science fiction. It's a good example I often give of how I rate a good science fiction book versus a bad science fiction book. Whether they hand-wavy ships and etc. and things appearing, or whether they have realistic timelines and they're going, this is not going to magically appear. There is going to be no magic. Oh, we managed to build this super battleship in 5 seconds. You don't. And that is sometimes my problem with some aspects of Star Trek, etc. Because where do the ships appear from? Thank you very much, everyone, for watching. Thank you to the new members. Thank you to all the patrons and subscribers and supporters. Thank you to everyone who watches the videos. Just thank you. Without your support, I wouldn't be able to achieve anything else I'm doing. So thank you. Take care. And thank you, Bishop, for the super chat. Take care, everyone.